Chapter 805. Nangong had always been elusive, so I didn't mind his sudden disappearance. What caught my attention was the last person that he had mentioned. Based on our interactions in the past, even though Nangong also hid some things from me, he was extremely principled. He would tell me things that he didn't want me to ask, but he wouldn't mention things that he couldn't say. He rarely acted like he did today, purposely keeping me in suspense. After thinking for a while, I couldn't figure out who the last person of the witch tribe was. But it didn't seem to be related to me, so I shook my head and put it aside. I collected my thoughts and returned to the foot of the mountain. Fong Min had woken up, but her mental state wasn't very good. Grandpa Yuan had pulled out a wisp of her soul, and it seemed that she wouldn't be able to recover in a short time. When Monk Mingjue saw me, he hurriedly led the other monks to bow to me and said, "Benefactor, you will be rewarded for your great kindness." He was smart and didn't ask for the result. He just congratulated me. I nodded slightly and didn't stand on ceremony. From the bottom of my heart, what I had done was indeed a good deed. I couldn't do the cruel act of cutting one's own flesh to feed an eagle, but I would try my best not to harm others while benefiting myself. This should be a person's basic concept of good and evil, and I would abide by it. I took out the souls of the previous people and handed them to Mingjue. I told him, "These are the souls of those 4 people. They died in vain, and their souls can't enter the cycle of reincarnation. I would like to ask the Master to perform a ritual to help them ascend. The Master's Buddhist teachings are profound, and he can certainly eliminate their resentment and send them to the 9 nether samsara." Mingjue looked ashamed when he heard me say that. He repeatedly praised me and then collected the souls. He said that these people's fate was special, and they needed to be sent back to the temple to ascend. I originally wanted to do it myself, but generally speaking, the Buddhists were good at this, so it would be better if Miaojua did it. On the other hand, after I had absorbed the witchcraft energy, I was gradually absorbing it along with the circulatory cycle revolution in my body, and there were signs of a breakthrough. I had to settle down as soon as possible and sort out the aura in my body. After that, Mingjue chatted with me for a while and left his contact information. Then, he left with the monks. I helped Fong Min to the car. After sending her home, I found a hotel to stay in. He sat cross-legged on the bed in the hotel room and began to sort out the shaman chi in his heavenly meridian. In the blink of an eye, several hours had passed in this meditation. I had finally finished sorting out the shaman energy in my body, and my cultivation had also taken the opportunity to break through to the late stage of the seal realm in one go. After the breakthrough, I wanted to settle down and stabilize my foundation, but the power in my body was still surging. The power I had absorbed from Grandpa Yuan hadn't been used up yet. The last time I made a rash breakthrough and almost became a demon was still vivid in my mind. However, the situation this time was different. During this period of time, I had spent a lot of time consolidating my foundation. My cultivation had already reached the peak of the middle stage of the seal realm, but I had been suppressing it for a long time. My foundation had already been firmly established. After breaking through to the late stage of the seal realm, the flow of energy in my heavenly veins didn't show any signs of sluggishness. Obviously, I didn't have to worry about becoming a demon again. Thus, after pondering for a while, I clenched my teeth and continued to sort out the shaman energy in my body, trying to break through the seal. Because I had enough shaman energy in my body and there was no barrier in the seal realm, I exhaled a long breath after a few hours. My cultivation had officially reached the peak of the seal realm, and I was only one step away from the Yang God realm. No wonder Nangong was confident that he could use Grandpa Yuan to create the Tai Sui so that I could directly advance to the Yang God realm. The shaman energy in Grandpa Yuan's body was too strong. Just the part one had absorbed was enough to support me to break through to the peak of the seal realm. Next, after devouring the Tai Sui, it was only a matter of time before I could advance to the Yang God realm. But now, without Grandpa Yuan, I had to find another way to successfully advance to the Yang God realm. In fact, I didn't have much choice. At present, the only information I knew was the power of the 9 spirits that Aizen had mentioned. It seemed that I needed to go abroad. In the past few days, many things had happened around me. The Xianyuan sword, the Nuwa stone, the Fushi zither, the Eastern Emperor bell, and other ancient divine weapons had appeared one after another. Some of the things in the ancient myths and legends also had a lot to do with me. Although I still couldn't figure out what it all meant, I had a vague sense of crisis. I always felt that something was about to happen. Thus, my desire for cultivation was very strong. Moreover, I had just met Bien, so I was eager to improve my cultivation and reunite with him as soon as possible. After thinking about it for a while, I decided not to slack off any longer. I immediately left for Thailand. After making up my mind, I didn't leave immediately. Instead, I went to Fong Min's house to make sure that she was safe and sound. Then, I gave her a heart-calming talisman before leaving Min province and returning to Shenzhen. Going abroad wasn't like moving around in China, where I could take action at any time. I had to go through some procedures like passports and visas first. If I went there myself, I didn't know how much time it would take. Of course, it was best to leave this matter to Wang Yongjun. It was true. I didn't know what methods he had used, but the next day, the passports and visas were all ready and sent to my room. I had used these 2 days to stabilize my cultivation base. At this moment, I was even more eager to enter the Yang spirit realm. I didn't want to waste any more time. I followed the driver Wang Yongjun had sent me to the airport. When we arrived at the airport, I wanted to book the next flight. Unexpectedly, Wang Yongjun had booked a small commercial plane and was on standby. The driver took me to the tarmac. After boarding the plane, we waited for 1 hour to confirm the flight route. Then, we departed for Thailand. A few hours later, the plane landed at Bangkok Airport. I didn't ask the driver Wang Yongjun had sent to accompany me. I left the airport and went to the downtown area of Bangkok. It was late at night. I didn't hurry to go to the King's Palace. Instead, I found a hotel to stay. There were many Chinese tourists in Bangkok. That was why the receptionists in these hotels could speak Chinese, which saved me a lot of trouble. After washing my face and brushing my teeth, I started to think about what I wanted to do next. That black-clothed Azan had told me that I had the power of the 9 spirits and that I could study it now. He meant that I could go and see the Tai Sui. At that time, it would be the best time to take action. However, I had learned about swallowing the Tai Sui from Nangong, so I didn't know how to do it. This time, I was a little anxious. Let alone the other things, just the Tai Sui's huge body was enough to make my scalp go numb. The entire night was spent in trepidation. The next morning, when it was just after 7 a.m., I got up from my bed. After a good night's rest, I was full of energy. I planned to go to the King's Palace immediately. However, when I got out of the hotel, the street was crowded with people. I didn't have a place to rest. I was skeptical. Did something bad happen here? When I got closer, I saw that the people on the street were standing on both sides of the road, leaving an empty space in the middle. Each of them was holding something in their hands. Some were clothes, while others were food. The crowd wasn't noisy. They were all looking at the west side of the street as if they were waiting for someone. I had never seen such a scene before. It piqued my curiosity. However, I wasn't in a hurry. I decided to stay here and see what was going on. Around 5 or 6 minutes later, people finally appeared on the west side of the street. They were all wearing Thai monk robes. Several people were walking in the front, carrying a solemn Buddha statue on their shoulders. The monks behind them were holding alms bowls. Every time they took a step, someone would throw clothes or food into their alms bowls. After that, the passers-by kneeled in front of the Buddha statue. They looked very pious. At this moment, I understood that today was an important Buddhist festival in Thailand. After a brief calculation, I confirmed that today was the summer festival. Before coming here, I had learned about Thai Buddhism. The summer festival was one of the most important Buddhist festivals in Thailand. It was held every year on the 15th day of the 11th month of the Thai calendar. It was also called the Summer Festival, the Passover Festival, or the Juju Festival. At this time, the 3-month summer festival was over, and the monks could go out as usual. On this day, the common people were holding a grand meal in the temple and listening to the monks recite Buddhist scriptures. The people moved the Buddha statue out of the temple and placed it in a small pavilion that could be moved. The alms bowls were placed on the Buddha statue, and the monks followed the Buddha statue with the alms bowls in their hands. Believers sat in a line and placed the alms bowls into the alms bowls. The alms bowls were mainly rice, vegetables, glutinous rice dumplings with pink bananas, and coconut rice dumplings with yada leaves. When people held a meal in Bangkok's Jinshan Temple, they moved the Buddha statue from the temple to the foot of the mountain. In addition, during the summer festival, people also performed activities such as donating Buddhist robes, summer festival garments, and releasing yellow cloth. Since these monks had moved the Buddha statue out of the temple, they must be monks from Jinshan Temple. I didn't want to watch anymore. I decided to walk through the crowd and head toward the king's palace. However, before I could take a step, the monks lifted the Buddha statue and stopped in front of me. At this moment, the people around me were kneeling in front of the Buddha statue. I was the only one standing. In Thailand, Buddhism had a much higher status than in our country. Whether it was a monk or a common person, they had to kneel when they saw the Buddha statue. However, I wasn't a monk, and I wasn't a Thai citizen either. Kneeling was a little too much for me. The monk walking in front of me was enraged when he saw me like that. He walked forward to talk to me. However, I didn't understand what he was talking about, so I just stood there and didn't move. The monk became even angrier. It seemed he thought that I was looking down on their Buddha. He raised his hand and placed it on my shoulder, trying to force me to kneel. I didn't want to fight with such an ordinary person, but his behavior showed that he didn't know what was good for him. I gathered my Taoist energy in my palm and gently pushed it away. The monk was sent flying in just a blink of an eye. When the people kneeling in front of me saw that I had easily sent the monk flying, they screamed and looked at me. Many of them were fanatics of Buddhism, and their eyes turned hostile. At the same time, a group of monks walked toward me from a distance. It seemed they wanted to punish me. With my cultivation base, I didn't care about these people. However, since I was in a foreign land, I didn't want to cause trouble. I leaped into the air, avoiding the pedestrians on the ground. Then, I turned into a jet of light and flew far away. Chapter 806. When Ality told me about the Grand Palace, I thought it was just a temple. But before I came here, I did some research and found out that the Grand Palace is not just a temple. In fact, the Grand Palace could be said to be the most important building in Thailand, as well as the most famous attraction. It was also the landmark of Bangkok. Also known as the Grand Palace, it used to be the palace of the Siamese royal family. It contained the essence of Thai architecture, painting, sculpture, and decoration. It was known as the Thailand Art Collection. In the early 20th century, King Rama VIII was assassinated in the Grand Palace, and his successor, King Rama IX, moved to the newly built Jarada Palace to the east of the Grand Palace. After that, the Grand Palace was open to the public for coronation ceremonies, palace celebrations, and so on. It became a famous tourist attraction in Thailand. There were 4 magnificent buildings in the king's palace, namely the Chaste Foundation Palace, the Law Palace, the Amaran Palace, and the Jade Buddha Temple. The Jade Buddha Temple was the place where the royal family held religious ceremonies. It was the most important temple in Bangkok and the most sacred place in Thai Buddhism. Ality and his disciple are obviously in this Jade Buddha Temple. My goal for this trip is also here. The car had already stopped in front of the king's palace. Since it was a scenic area, the car couldn't go in directly, so I got off the car and walked inside. It was an important festival for Thai Buddhism, so most of the people in the palace were tourists. Basically, there were no locals. According to a Chinese peddler, most of the locals went to the Jade Buddha Temple to listen to Zen. Although the buildings of the Grand King's Palace were very grand, I didn't come here for sightseeing. I didn't want to stay here any longer, so I headed straight for the Jade Buddha Temple. The Jade Buddha Temple was located in the northeast corner of the Grand Palace. At this time, many tourists were rushing there. Perhaps they knew that today was an important Thai Buddhist festival and wanted to join in the fun, so it was not difficult to find them. When I arrived, the entrance of the Jade Buddha Temple was crowded with tourists. This place was the main hall of the Jade Buddha Temple. Of course, the scripture preaching ceremony would be held here. However, there were soldiers in front of us to maintain order, so ordinary people couldn't enter. I could only watch from afar. A white-haired old man was sitting in front of the huge jade Buddha statue. The old man wore a golden robe with some strange patterns embroidered on it. Sitting on both sides of him were a group of Thai monks in red robes. At first glance, I found one of them familiar. After a closer look, I recognized him. He was the black-clothed Azenarati. I clearly remembered that Alati had once told me that his master was Siddhargupta of the Jade Buddha Temple of the King's Palace. In Thailand, only eminent monks between 30 and 60 years old could be called Venerable Father. Venerable Father had a high status in Thai Buddhism. What's more, Alati's master was the Venerable Father of the most prestigious temple in Thailand. His status was self-evident. If Sirambhavati Sirambhava was Sirambhava, then his master, Sirambhava, as is that he was a disciple of King. The old man, sitting in front of the Buddha statue, was able to make Alati preach to him. It seemed that his identity was not ordinary. In addition, from the way he was dressed, he should be a member of the royal family. I had that Sias, that was to be he. I have Sias, he that palace. I had the three-faced bronze Buddha statue that Alati had given me as a keepsake. Normally, I could enter the Jade Buddha Temple. However, the situation today was special. With so many people here, I couldn't get a seat. Left with no choice, I had to wait until the end of the Buddhist scripture lecture. The Buddhist scripture lecture wouldn't end in a short time. Since it was still early, I decided to walk around the Grand Palace instead of standing there like a fool. The scenery here was unique, and it had an exotic charm to it. It was not an undeserved reputation for being so famous. I turned around and prepared to leave. However, after a few minutes, a large group of people gathered behind me. They were all ordinary tourists, so I couldn't use my Taoist technique to push them away. I had to force my way through. It took me a long time to get out of the crowd. After coming out, I conveniently bought a Chinese version of the tourist guide from a roadside stall. Following the instructions on it, I walked around the king's palace while reading. The Grand Palace was huge. It was more than 200,000 square meters. Except for the forbidden areas of the palace, which weren't open to the public, the rest of the palace was open to the public. Before I knew it, I had reached a place that looked like a Western building. It wasn't as crowded as the previous one. I glanced at the guide in my hand. This place was called Wulong Baiman Palace. It was the only Western-style building in the Grand Palace. There weren't many tourists here. Perhaps it was because this building looked special in the Grand Palace, but in the eyes of the tourists, it wasn't as unique as the other buildings. However, this place belonged to the inner court and wasn't open to the public. I had to walk around it a few times. After finding nothing strange, I decided to move on to the next attraction. However, after taking a few steps, I found some people following me. They weren't ordinary tourists. They all had the aura of Buddhism. Moreover, they looked familiar. They were the monks I had fought with on the street. Earlier, I didn't want to pay attention to those low-level monks on the street and flew away. Who would have thought that they could follow me? It was interesting. However, they weren't in a hurry to take action. Perhaps it was because this place was an important place for the royal family, and it wasn't convenient for them to attack. I didn't take the initiative to attack them. There was a thick forest in front of me. I had to lure them there first before taking action. I quickened my pace, and those people followed me. When I reached the depths of the forest, I stopped. The group of monks behind me seemed to have realized that I had discovered them. They didn't show any mercy and dashed toward me. I didn't hurry to attack them. I turned around and observed them. These 5 or 6 people only had Sure Yao cultivation base. I didn't know what they were relying on to chase after me. I stood still and waited until they came close. Then, I used the Heavenly Master's word and shouted, "Kneel!" In an instant, those people stopped moving and knelt down in front of me. Their faces were frightened, but they quickly changed their expressions. Their eyes were filled with murderous aura. It seemed there was a big difference between Thai Buddhism and the Buddhism in our country. I had only seen such ferocious eyes on Monk Miaojue. If they were experts in Buddhism, they wouldn't have such murderous thoughts. Although they were rude to me, I didn't want to hurt them. It was my first time here, so it wasn't wise to make an enemy of Thai Buddhism. I walked in front of them. I didn't care if they understood me or not, but I warned them not to seek trouble for themselves in the future. The leader of the group was a little stronger. His cultivation base was at the peak of Yao. After listening to me, he was bewildered. Then he asked me in broken Chinese, "What's your purpose in coming here?" I didn't care about him. I walked around them and headed back. Unexpectedly, I hadn't gone far when I heard Buddhist chants coming from a distance. According to this person's aura, he was at the middle stage of the sealing heavenly master realm. Previously, I had my suspicions. How could a few Yao monks do anything to me? It turned out they had sent a sealing heavenly master on a mission. However, this level of strength wasn't enough to stop me. I didn't care who was behind me and continued to walk forward. That monk seemed to be annoyed by my behavior. He flew toward me in the blink of an eye. I stopped in my tracks and started to size him up. He looked like a middle-aged man with the cultivation base of a sealing heavenly master. I guess he had a high position in the temple. Perhaps he was also a venerable father. It seemed Jinshan Temple was really calculative. I had just injured one of their monks, but they had sent a venerable father to capture me. Seeing that I didn't speak, he asked, "You're a cultivator from China. Why did you come to Thailand? What are you trying to do?" As soon as this person arrived, he used an interrogative tone, which made me quite displeased. I didn't answer him. I just shook my head and walked past him. When the monk saw that I didn't pay attention to him, he became even angrier. I didn't care about his feelings. With my current strength, dealing with him was as easy as flipping my hand. After walking for around 10 meters, I suddenly felt an evil energy coming from behind me. It was a familiar feeling. It was similar to the move Azan had used in the exchange competition in Shenzhen. It seemed the monks of Jinshan Temple didn't practice Orthodox Buddhism. Instead, they used these evil and sinister moves as a facade. I had suffered a lot from Western mysterious techniques, and it wasn't a good feeling. Moreover, although this man's cultivation base wasn't as high as mine, he was still a sealing heavenly master. Moreover, he had used such a sinister move. I couldn't be careless. With that thought in mind, I immediately turned around and mobilized the Tao energy in my body to cover my body. The evil energy dashed toward me and hit my chest in the blink of an eye. Although this kind of evil technique was tricky, the monk's strength was much lower than mine. Moreover, he didn't have the ability to cross realms to injure people like me. The evil energy dissipated in a flash. I wasn't hurt at all. The monk didn't look surprised when he saw that his technique had no effect on me. His face looked serious as he took out a thumb-sized black amulet from his chest. I had seen this thing before, and the three-armed Buddha statue on it looked very familiar. It was almost the same as the amulet Azan had used in the past. Azan had used this amulet to stump me. Now that I saw it again, I couldn't help but take it seriously. The monk took off the amulet and placed it on his hands. He closed his eyes and mumbled something. As he chanted louder and louder, the amulet actually began to change. While I wasn't paying attention, the thumb-sized amulet had grown to the size of a palm. Chapter 807. I was already at the Seal, Celestial Master completion realm. Although I didn't dare to be arrogant and think that I could kill him, I could definitely escape unscathed. As such, I wasn't in a hurry to attack. I was curious about this evil technique and wanted to see what this monk was capable of. While I was thinking, the amulet had already become as tall as a person. The monk didn't hold it in his hand anymore, but stood on the ground. However, he didn't stop chanting. I didn't know how big he wanted the Buddha to become before he stopped. As I was thinking about this, the monk suddenly opened his eyes and said to me in broken Chinese, "You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. You actually dare to stand here and wait for your death." My expression didn't change. I ignored his provocation and looked at the Buddha that was as tall as a person. I had a feeling that this Buddha wasn't as simple as just growing bigger. Indeed, when the monk saw that I didn't respond, he closed his eyes and continued chanting. The Buddha didn't grow bigger, but its body gradually emitted black smoke. The rolling smoke gradually formed the appearance of Shakyamuni. The Buddha, made of smoke, under the monk's control, swung its palm at me. The palm was extremely fast. Even with my current Seal Celestial Master Completion Realm cultivation, I couldn't immediately block it so I could only dodge. In the blink of an eye, a loud sound came from where I was standing, and a lot of smoke and dust rose. After the dust settled, there was a 5-finger-deep pit that was several meters deep. I was shocked. I didn't expect a phantom to have such power. It seemed to be comparable to the Yang God, Celestial Master's Yang God. I didn't dare to be careless. Immediately, I mobilized the Tao energy in my body to the armor-removing sword. I stepped on the 9-star Heavenly Dipper and slashed at Shakyamuni. The phantom seemed to come to life. When it saw my sword energy, it met it with another palm. Unfortunately, it still underestimated my strength. Even an ordinary Yang God Celestial Master wouldn't dare to take my sword head-on, let alone a mere phantom. When the huge palm met the armor-removing sword energy, it immediately dissipated. However, the armor-removing sword energy didn't weaken in the slightest. Wherever the armor-removal sword chi passed through, the thick black fog would dissipate. When the statue of the Sakyamuni Buddha dissipated, the monk's body trembled, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. His face turned deathly pale. The Buddha statue, which was as tall as a person, returned to its original form and landed on the ground with a crisp sound. I withdrew my stance and walked toward the monk. In a low voice, I said, "I didn't want to fight with you, but you've stirred up trouble. Don't blame me for not showing mercy to your Jinshan temple." As he spoke, the armor-stripping sword in his hand was already in front of his neck. The monk seemed to realize that he couldn't escape death today. He didn't make any noise and simply closed his eyes, waiting for my sword to fall. Just as I was about to take action, a familiar voice sounded from behind me. "Lord, please spare his life." This person was Arati. Perhaps he had sensed the fight earlier and wanted to see what was going on. However, since the monk had been rude to me, I could have just killed him. I didn't know why Arati was begging for mercy. However, since the monk didn't have the strength to fight back, I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted to hear what Arati had to say. I put away the armor remover sword and turned to look at Alati. He quickly walked toward me and bowed to greet me. He didn't waste any time and directly told me that the monk was called Dragon Popo Kue and that he was a monk of Jinshan Temple. If I kill this person, it will definitely attract the revenge of Jinshan Temple. I had already expected this. This person had the cultivation base of a heavenly seal master. According to Thai Buddhism's ranking system, he deserved the title of Dragon Popo. However, the Dragon Popo of Jinshan Temple couldn't do anything to me. Who else could fight me? Arati saw that my expression didn't change. Perhaps he knew what I was thinking. He moved closer to me and whispered, "This Jinshan Temple has a Dragon Popo, and I heard that there's a Zhao Kun." Although I didn't know what these terms meant, from Ala Ti's expression, I could guess that Long Pu and Zhao Kun were stronger than Venerable Father Dragon. Venerable Father had a high status in Thai Buddhism. If he was killed, it would alert Long Pu and Zhao Kun, whom Arati mentioned. At that time, it would indeed be a little troublesome. It would have been fine if he didn't know about it earlier, but now that he knew about it, he felt a little apprehensive. However, this is nothing to me. Even if I kill all these monks, I can't guarantee that this matter won't be leaked. However, since Alati knows me, the Jade Buddha Temple might be dragged into this mess. At that time, there will be a huge commotion, and the consequences will be unimaginable. However, if I don't kill them, the people of Jinshan Temple will definitely find trouble with me again. At that time, a battle will be inevitable. However, on second thought, if he spared their lives, they wouldn't end up in a situation where they had a fight to the death. With a decision in my heart, I no longer hesitated. He put the armor-removing sword back into the Xiang Lu pouch and signaled Alati to leave this place quickly. Alati didn't dare to be negligent. He nodded repeatedly and followed me out of the forest, heading toward the Jade Buddha Temple. Wulong's Baiman Palace wasn't far from the Jade Buddha Temple. Along the way, Alati kept apologizing to me, saying that he didn't know that I was in Thailand. Moreover, the king had been listening to a Zen sermon in the Jade Buddha Temple. That was why he didn't treat me well. The king that Alati mentioned must be the old man who was sitting quietly in the Jade Buddha Hall. I had already expected this, so I didn't mind it. Although he called me the son of God, I couldn't compare to the king of Thailand. I knew what was more important. I waved my hand, indicating that he didn't need to worry about it. I just want to come to Thailand, but I didn't contact him beforehand. I even attacked the Buddhist monks in the king's palace. I was a little rash. When Alati heard me, he stopped and bowed to me. Sir, please don't misunderstand. Our Jade Buddha Temple and Jinshan Temple don't have a good relationship. Not only do we have a good relationship, but we've also been enemies for many years. I've already sensed the situation in his words when I was in the dense forest. However, it was Thai Buddhism's business, so I couldn't ask or intervene. That was why I had agreed to spare those people's lives, because I wanted to give the Jade Buddha Temple face. I had come here to ask for something, and if I didn't act friendly, I was afraid it would be inconvenient. I didn't care about that, so I told him not to be so formal. After listening to me, Alati nodded and followed me. He didn't say anything else. I had some doubts that I wanted him to answer. He had mentioned that Jinshan Temple had Long Pu and even Zhao Koan. I didn't know much about Thailand's division of realms. The only thing I knew about the Three Spirits realm was from him in Shenzhen. Alati didn't dare to hide anything from me. According to him, in Thai Buddhism, Long Pu was one level higher than Venerable Father Dragon, which was equivalent to the Yang God Celestial Master realm in China. Zhao Kuan's status was even higher than Long Pu's, and Zhou Guan was above him. Zhou Guan was the title given by the king. It was said that his cultivation base had reached the level of God. After listening to him, I had a general understanding of Thailand's division of realms. In other words, Venerable Father Dragon was a Seal Heavenly Master, Long Pu was a Yang God Celestial Master, and Zhao Kuan was a Yang God. From this, I knew that Zhou Guan had ascended to the heavenly realm. Ascending to the heavenly realm meant that he had reached the peak of cultivation. It was reasonable to describe him as a god. I then asked Alati if he knew how many Zhou Guan there were in Thailand. He told me that Zhou Guan was just a legend. Until now, there hadn't been any accurate records of him. At this moment, he only knew Zhao Kuan. I nodded. It made sense. Thailand's population and territory couldn't compare to China's. With such a large population, the probability of having someone with such a cultivation base wasn't high. Even if there was someone with such a high cultivation base, he would have ascended to the heavenly realm and wouldn't have stayed in the human world. That was why my question was meaningless. I was more interested in the Zhao Kuan he had mentioned. He had previously mentioned that there was a Zhao Kuan in the Golden Mountain Temple. Of course, I wasn't afraid of Long Pu of Jinshan Temple. When I was at the middle stage of the Seal Realm, I had the power to fight against Yang God Celestial Master, let alone now that I was at the peak stage of the Seal Realm. However, Zhao Kuan was equivalent to the Ascending Realm. With my current cultivation base, the gap between us was too big. If those monks could invite Zhao Kuan to deal with me, I wouldn't be able to deal with him alone since the evil sacrificial spirit wasn't with me. I hurried to ask Alati if it was true. After listening to me, Alati shook his head. He was a little hesitant as he said, "I'm not sure. I've only heard people talking about it." This vague answer made me a little worried. However, it was better to believe it than not. I had to be prepared. I was in a foreign country, and I didn't have anyone I could rely on. Speaking of friendship, I only knew Alati. However, if Jinshan Temple had the rumor about Zhao Kuan, I guess the Jade Buddha Temple also had the same rumor. No matter what, the Jade Buddha Temple status was second to none in the entire Thai Buddhism world. In terms of power, they wouldn't lose to Jinshan Temple. With that in mind, I quickly asked Alati about it. After listening to me, he wore a sad expression, as though I had brought up something sad. After a moment of silence, he explained to me the reason behind it. According to him, the Jade Buddha Temple status was second to none in the Thai Buddhism world. However, it was different from the other temples. Besides chanting Buddhist scriptures every day, they also needed to worship the power of the 9 spirits. They hoped that they could get the approval of the power of the 9 spirits. Only after they got the approval of the power of the 9 spirits could they become the Holy Son and advance to the Venerable Father level. However, after they advanced to the Long Pu level, they had to worship the power of the 9 spirits. Without the power of the 9 spirits order, they couldn't go out on their own. Chapter 808. According to Arati, the most powerful person in the Jade Buddha temple was probably his master, Chitragupta. No wonder he had used his master's name to invite me to Thailand. While we were talking, we arrived at the entrance of the Jade Buddha temple. The scripture preaching ceremony was over, but many tourists were still lingering around. Alati could only lead me through the crowd and into the Jade Buddha hall. The monks from earlier were still sitting in the temple. When they saw us, they stood up and clasped their palms together to greet Alati. Alati returned the greeting and took me through the Jade Buddha temple. We arrived at a courtyard. The layout of the courtyard was similar to that of Chinese tradition. The flowers, shrubs, and rockery were arranged in a certain way. Geomancy was hidden everywhere. I couldn't help but look around. Alati saw my movements and smiled. All the courtyards in this Jade Buddha temple were built by a Chinese geomancy master. Speaking of which, it has something to do with the metaphysics society that I belong to. I was bewildered. Then I got it. The last time I met him, I represented the metaphysics society. A few years had passed, and the situation had changed. However, I didn't want to talk about my personal matters, so I smiled and acquiesced. We continued to walk for around 5 or 6 minutes until we reached a door with red ribbons hanging from it. He finally stopped and gestured for me to calm down. Then, he walked forward and stood in front of the door. He bowed and shouted, "Master, the Holy Sun is here." It was interesting that when he talked to Shiva, he didn't use Thai, but Chinese. Could it be that Shiva was Chinese? As I was thinking about this, I heard a reply from the other side of the door. Shiva gestured for us to enter. Alati pushed the door open and bowed, inviting me to enter. I didn't refuse. When we entered the room, I saw a monk in a red robe sitting on a lotus pedestal with his back to us. This scene surprised me. It wasn't because of Shiva's style. It was because he wasn't sitting on a Buddhist futon, but on a lotus pedestal. As far as I knew, only monks like Bodhisattvas could sit on a lotus pedestal. Even arhats in Buddhism couldn't sit on a lotus pedestal. Obviously, it was impossible for Sirambhava to be enlightened and become a Buddha. This was probably due to the difference in customs between the Buddhism of Thailand and the Buddhism of the Central Earth. At this moment, Alati walked forward and bowed respectfully to Shiramampa's back. He then said, "Master, the Holy Sun is here." Shiva didn't move at first. After a few seconds, he stood up and turned around. He didn't say anything, but his dim yellow eyes scanned me from head to toe. He looked to be in his 50s or 60s and looked hale and hearty. There was a string of Buddhist beads engraved with complicated Sanskrit on his chest. After glancing at the Sanskrit characters, I felt strange. Recently, I've had a lot of dealings with the Buddhist sects, so I've also studied the Buddhist sections. As far as I know, Thai Buddhism is Theravada Buddhism, also known as Southern Buddhism and Pali Buddhism. Of course, their scriptures were written in Pali, so why was Shiva's prayer beads written in Sanskrit? It was said that the Sanskrit language was created by the guardian deity of Buddhism, Brahma. Sanskrit was a language of the Indo-Aryan branch of the Indo-Iranian language family of the Indo-European language family. It was one of the oldest languages in the Indo-European language family. Although Thailand and India weren't far from each other, and it was understandable that Buddhism could influence each other, the scriptures they wrote were completely different. I recalled the scene I'd seen in the courtyard, the conversation between Alati and Shiva in Chinese, and the Sanskrit prayer beads. It was obvious that Shiva had a deep relationship with the Buddhism in this country. While I was thinking, Shiva finally spoke. He bowed to me respectfully and said, "Mister, please have a seat." His Chinese was perfect and fluent. It seemed to confirm my previous guess. The way he addressed me was also unique. He didn't call me Holy Son or Benefactor, but he called me Mister. It was new to me. I nodded and stooped to check. There was only a futon in front of him. I sat down cross-legged. After I sat down, Shiva asked Alati to serve me tea. His gesture didn't look like an otherworldly Buddhist, but he had the etiquette of the secular world. I didn't mind. I took the tea from Alati and tasted it. Then, Shiva continued. A few years ago, I heard from Alati that he met someone who was recognized by the power of the 9 spirits in Shenzhen, China. Today, I can see that you're really extraordinary. His polite words were beautiful, so I didn't mind. I cupped my fists and smiled. That day, Alati and I agreed to visit your temple 1 year later. However, I was busy with secular affairs and missed the appointed time. I hope you won't blame me for taking the liberty to come here. He smiled and shook his head. I have the power of the 9 spirits, so you don't need to be so polite. I can come to the Jade Buddha temple at any time. Since Shiva was so understanding, I didn't stand on ceremony anymore. Then, we chatted casually. Most of the time, we asked about the situation of the cultivators in this country. Of course, there was nothing to hide. Alati had been to China before, so he had a general understanding of the situation. I took the chance to ask him why he knew so much about China and the pedestal of the lotus flower. Shiva still wore a faint smile and answered my questions one by one. According to him, when he was still Asian, he had traveled all over China and had exchanges with many famous monks about the Dharma. During his travels, he came in contact with Chinese metaphysics. He was very interested in it. While exchanging Buddhist teachings with the local Buddhist monks, he studied Chinese metaphysics. Soon, he was fascinated. After that, he stayed in China for 10 years before returning to the Jade Buddha temple. Now that he was almost 70 years old, he often recalled some things that happened in the past. That was why he kept asking me about China. It was similar to my speculation. I nodded and didn't mind it. As for the pedestal, it was a tradition of the Jade Buddha temple. The golden lotus was the national flower of Thailand. It was often used in large-scale ceremonies and celebrations, such as building cities. When the army went to war, they would put the golden chain flower on the military flag to symbolize victory. Thai people also liked to plant the golden chain flower around their houses. In Thai culture, the golden chain flower was a symbol of good luck. As the highest temple in Thailand, the Jade Buddha temple naturally had to enjoy the highest treatment. That was why when the Jade Buddha temple was first built, the king had given the pedestal of the golden lotus to the first abbot of the temple and asked him to inherit his legacy. In other temples in Thailand, monks weren't allowed to enjoy the pedestal of the golden lotus. Moreover, they had to follow the lead of the Jade Buddha temple. That was why the pedestal of the golden lotus in the Jade Buddha temple wasn't only a symbol of status, but also a symbol of power. After listening to this, I understood that Thai Buddhism was different from Chinese Buddhism. From a certain point of view, Thai Buddhism was mixed with the secular world. It wasn't just about faith, but also politics. It was understandable. However, with my current cultivation base, I was no longer in the secular world, so I didn't really care about this kind of thing. In fact, my only purpose for coming here was the Thai Sui, which was to increase my cultivation base and reach the Yang God realm as soon as possible. However, since this place was Lord Shiva's territory, I didn't know how to bring it up. After all, the power of the 9 spirits was the most precious treasure of the Jade Buddha temple. I had to think of a better way to get it. Lord Shiva saw that I didn't say anything, and he seemed to know what I was thinking. He smiled and asked, "Are you here to observe the power of the 9 spirits?" I was thrilled. I came here because I've encountered a bottleneck in my cultivation. I want to see if I can comprehend something while observing the power of the 9 spirits. After listening to me, Lord Shiva didn't answer me immediately. He gazed at me as if he wanted to see my power. After a while, his face became indifferent. He asked, "Your Excellency, I can't see through your power. I guess you're going to advance to the dragon rank soon." Before I could answer, Alati spoke first. He looked at Lord Shiva and said, "Master, you asked me to go to Wulong Baiman Palace to investigate the situation." It was the Holy Sun who was fighting with the people of Jinshan Temple. The Holy Sun almost killed Dragon Matron Kuei. Wet Dragon Granny didn't feel surprised when he heard this. Perhaps he also knew how powerful Dragon Granny Kuei was. Since he couldn't see through my cultivation base, it wasn't strange that Dragon Matron Kuei was defeated by me. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said that he had asked Alati to investigate the situation because he had sensed the aura of the Tao Qi. However, he didn't expect that I would be the one who emitted the aura of the Tao Qi. Since I had been recognized by the power of the 9 spirits, why would I still use the Tao Qi? Since Lord Shiva had stayed in China for 10 years, he must have known that the cultivators of China all practiced the Tao Chi. He knew that I could use the power of the 9 spirits, because Alati had seen it in the exchange competition in Shenzhen. However, at that time, I'd only used the black bead that Goldie had given me and hadn't really practiced the sorcery energy. Therefore, he didn't know that I could practice 2 kinds of energy at the same time. This matter had already spread in the country, so there was no need to hide it. Since he was so curious, I told him the reason. I didn't expect that after Lord Shiva heard that I had 2 kinds of spiritual energy in my body and that I could practice at the same time, he looked very surprised. Not only that, but his whole body was trembling. I didn't know whether it was because of excitement or fear. Chapter 809. I didn't know what was going on. His sudden action caught me off guard. At this moment, many questions popped up in my head. I was dumbstruck. Alati, who was sitting next to me, wore a startled face. He didn't know why his master would do that. However, he seemed to recognize that he couldn't sit still anymore. He kneeled in front of me and followed his master's lead. Looking at the master and disciple's behavior, I gradually understood that this matter might be related to my identity. I hurried to ask them to stand up. Shiva, what's going on? Shiva didn't answer me immediately. He asked Alati to leave first. It seemed I couldn't let him know about this. Alati didn't hesitate. He left the room and closed the door. After he left, Chidragupta told him the reason for the incident. This is a secret that the previous abbot of the Jade Buddha Temple has always kept. Before his master passed away, he told him that this secret can only be revealed when the emissary appears. After listening to him, I became more curious. How is this secret related to me? More precisely, how is it related to my identity? From him, I learned that the power of the 9 spirits worshipped in the Jade Buddha Temple had descended from the sky when the first abbot was still in office. At first, people didn't know his origin. They only knew that he had a special power that had never appeared in Thailand before. That power was really strong. At that time, the power of the 9 spirits was seriously injured. Under such circumstances, even Zhao Kuan wasn't his match. At that time, the situation in Thailand was complicated. Since the Jade Buddha Temple was connected to the government, many forces wanted to uproot it. The Jade Buddha Temple was already in a difficult situation. Now that they had lost Zhao Kuan, they couldn't resist the outside forces. Almost everyone thought that the Jade Buddha Temple had run out of luck. However, the abbot didn't think so. He thought that it was a heaven-sent opportunity. If he could keep this power in the temple, he could use his power to protect the Jade Buddha Temple. With this thought in mind, he went to talk to the abbot and asked him to stay in the Jade Buddha Temple. At that time, the power of 9 spirits was seriously injured. Perhaps knowing that she could not continue to flee and had to find a place to take refuge to recover from her injuries, she agreed to the abbot's request. The abbot was also quite scheming. He was afraid that the power of the 9 spirits was just perfunctory, so he proposed a condition, wanting the power of the 9 spirits to give him some of its power. The power of the 9 spirits seemed to know what he was planning. Without any hesitation, he gave the abbot a dark green bead, saying that it contained a portion of his power. When needed, it could be mobilized at will. After the 2 sides completed the transaction, the power of the 9 spirits was brought to a secret location to recuperate. Before he left, he told the abbot that he might stay in Jade Buddha Temple for a long time. He would only leave when someone with 2 types of energy appeared. That person is the messenger sent by heaven to save the Jade Buddha Temple. He must not be neglected. After the abbot heard this, he repeatedly expressed his gratitude. He knew the current situation of Jade Buddha Temple. If no external forces intervened, Jade Buddha Temple would soon perish. After saying that, Shiragamis stopped talking. I finally understood the reason for his previous behavior. Perhaps part of it was to comply with Master's order, and the other part was to ask me to save Jade Buddha Temple. At present, Jade Buddha Temple situation was not optimistic. It seemed that the crisis of hundreds of years had not been resolved. I was very clear about this, but I did not care too much about it. Previously, he mentioned that the power of the 9 spirits came from heaven. I knew very well about the birth of Tai Sui, so it was understandable that it came from heaven. However, I did not know why he was seriously injured. As far as I knew, Tai Sui was very powerful. Even Yin Nantian, the young god celestial master, could not withstand a blow from him. Since he could seriously injure Tai Sui, his cultivation was indeed terrifying. At present, I knew that only President Li, the Lord of Fairyland, and the man in Wanwu Grotto Heaven, who had ascended to heaven, Wang Can's father, could do it. But Wang Can's family was from the Wu tribe, and his father would not do such a thing. Moreover, according to the time, it happened hundreds of years ago. Even if these people lived for a long time, their cultivation at that time should not be too high. In other words, it was someone else who had injured Tai Sui. However, it had been a long time, and I had no way to know the whole story. I could only wait until I met Tai Sui and asked him. With that thought, I couldn't wait to see Tai Sui. I immediately asked Lord Shiva, "Can you take me to see Tai Sui?" Lord Shiva didn't hesitate and answered, "Anytime." I didn't linger and followed him out of the room. We walked for more than 10 minutes, bypassing all the buildings in Jade Buddha Temple. Eventually, we arrived at a deserted place. I was surprised to see this desolate place. Except for weeds, there was no building, not even a cave. It was hard to imagine where they had hidden Tai Sui. Lord Shiva seemed to see the doubt in my eyes. He explained, "My lord, you don't know this. The power of the 9 spirits is too big, and we couldn't hide it in any building. So we had to let it hide underground." After listening to him, I didn't answer him. I took a step forward and scanned the ground. I found that there was a restriction formation here. It seemed Lord Shiva didn't lie to me. I retracted my eyes and asked Lord Shiva to open the restriction formation. He nodded and sat cross-legged on the ground. Then he took off the string of prayer beads from his chest. Then he closed his eyes and chanted a spell. As the incantation sounded, the string of Buddhist beads gradually left his hand and flew a few meters in front of him before stopping. At the same time, the prayer beads spun in the air and radiated Buddha light. This scene was familiar. It was almost the same as when Miao Ju opened the Spirit Lock Tower. A moment later, Lord Shalampa shouted. Then, a golden door appeared under the string of prayer beads. I was happy. It seemed this was the entrance. I hurried to open the door. However, I was alarmed. I turned around and looked at Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva seemed to know what I was thinking. He shook his head and said, "I haven't reached Long Pu yet. I can't go in and serve the power of the 9 spirits. My lord, please go in alone. I'll wait here." I had heard about this from Ality before. Wet Dragon Mother's words made sense. However, I was still doubtful. I didn't know if he was trying to trick me or not. Anyway, I had come here to swallow the Tai Sui and become a young god celestial master. I was going to see the Tai Sui soon. Even if there was a mountain of daggers and a sea of fire in front of me, I had to go. With this thought in mind, I didn't hesitate to open the door and walk in. As soon as I stood still, the door closed. I didn't care about it and looked ahead. This place was a cave, and I was standing at the highest point of the cave. Rows of winding stone stairs were chiseled on the surrounding rock walls. The stone stairs seemed to extend to the bottom of the cave. I didn't hurry to go down. I stood on the stone stairs and looked down. However, it was very dim down there. Even with my Heavenly Master Seal cultivation base, I could only see 5 or 6 meters ahead. It felt like I was in the Spirit Lock Tower. The atmosphere here was a little strange. I hadn't sensed any fluctuation of witchcraft energy since I had entered this place. His heart was filled with suspicions. Could it be that Shiva had played some tricks on him? However, since I was already here, I had to find out the truth. For the time being, I put my suspicion aside and walked down the stone stairs. After walking for several minutes, I saw several marks on the stone stairs in front of me. Along the way, I carefully observed the surroundings. I hadn't found anything strange before, so it was a little strange to see a mark here. I carefully examined it and found that there was a faint aura of witchcraft energy on the mark. Previously, Ality had told me that all the monks in the Jade Buddha Temple who had been recognized by the power of the 9 spirits and had become dragon primes had to go there to serve the power of the 9 spirits. Combined with what Lord Shiva had said, the marks here should have been left by the monks who had become dragon primes. In other words, this place was the resting place of the Tai Sui. After understanding this, I didn't delay any longer and quickly walked down the stone stairs. After walking for about 1 hour, a building appeared below me. From its appearance, it seemed to be in the shape of a tower. Previously, I felt that the way Lord Shiva opened the restriction was similar to the way Miaojua opened the Spirit Lock Tower. After I entered the cave, I felt that the aura of the primal chaos in this cave was almost the same as the aura in the Spirit Lock Tower. Could it be that this pagoda was also a Spirit Lock pagoda? I was curious and quick in my pace. When I could see the whole tower, I found that it wasn't the Spirit Lock Tower. This tower only had 4 wheels. According to the records in the Buddhist scriptures, it wasn't comparable to the Spirit Lock Tower. However, the strange thing was that this tower didn't have any floors. From a distance, it didn't look like a tower at all. It looked more like a beacon tower with edges and corners. This tower was not made of stone, but metal. There were strange patterns engraved all over it. At first glance, it looked a little messy, but after careful observation, it was very orderly. What was even more strange was that this tower didn't have any doors or windows. Moreover, it was surrounded by hard stone walls. It seemed the Tai Sui was hiding in this strange tower. With that thought in mind, I took a step forward and used my heavenly insight to check the situation inside the tower. Unexpectedly, I was blown away by a force. I tasted something sweet in my throat, and I vomited a mouthful of blood. I was bewildered. I didn't expect that this strange tower didn't only have a strange shape, but it also contained a tremendous power. I had just wanted to take a look at it, but I was wounded badly. If I took out the Xianyuan sword to break through, the backlash would be even worse. Chapter 8:10. Whether it was its structure or its power, it was enough to prove that this item was extraordinary. After I got the Xianyuan sword, I studied the appearance, usage, and power of the 10 great ancient divine weapons. Previously, I thought that this pagoda was somehow related to the spirit sealing pagoda in the Crouching Buddha Temple. I didn't think of anything else and neglected the most important point. Now that my mind was clear, I suddenly remembered that this pagoda had an ancient aura, and its shape was exactly the same as one of the ancient divine weapons, the Haotian pagoda. It was said that the Haotian pagoda could absorb the stars and change the moon. It was an important treasure in the heavenly realm and had immense power. It was said that it could subdue all demons and evil spirits. When necessary, it could even subdue immortals and gods. However, no one knew where he went after that. No one knew where he was. As for its origin, I've read about it in some ancient books. The 2 words Haotian in the Haotian pagoda referred to Hao Tian Emperor, who was also known as Tai Hao Fushi. Tai Hao Fushi used to be the heavenly emperor, and this Haotian pagoda was forged by him. At that time, some people thought that the Haotian pagoda had gone to the human world, but a great war broke out in the human world, and the later generations didn't have time to look for it. After thousands of years, the matter of the ancient divine artifact could no longer be investigated and was gradually forgotten by people. I could confirm that the pagoda in front of me wasn't the spirit sealing pagoda, but the Haotian pagoda. I was overjoyed by this discovery. However, after the ecstasy, I quickly realized that it wasn't useful to know that this was the Haotian pagoda. On the one hand, I couldn't go in, and on the other hand, I couldn't get in touch with the Tai Sui inside. I didn't expect this situation. I sat down cross-legged and leaned against the stone wall to heal my wounds while thinking. After I entered, I didn't see anyone else. According to Arati and Shalongpo's description, all the Longpu in the Jade Buddha Temple had to come and serve the Tai Sui. They couldn't possibly deceive me, and I didn't see any Longpu. The biggest possibility was that the Longpu were in the pagoda. If the Longpu entered by themselves, it meant that the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple knew how to enter. Shalongpo, as the host, didn't tell me, so it was impossible. From this, I deduced that the Longpu in the Jade Buddha Temple had been summoned by the Tai Sui. In order to enter the pagoda, one needed the Tai Sui's permission. As I pondered, my body returned to normal. I stood up and mobilized the shaman energy in my body, spreading it out. I tried to attract Tai Sui's attention in the Haoyan Pagoda. Sure enough, a few seconds later, there was some movement in the tower. I heard a light cough from within the tower. Immediately after, I felt a strong suction force engulfing me. I knew that this was Tai Sui's method, so I didn't resist and let it sweep me into the clear heaven pagoda. After I stood still, only then did I discover that the inside of this vast heaven pagoda was completely red, but there were no lamps in the surroundings, which was rather strange. I didn't dwell too much on this matter. I looked in front of me and saw an enormous figure standing not far from me. Dozens of pieces of red cloth were scattered around his feet. I took a closer look and saw that the cloth was covering white bones. At this point, I suddenly understood. The red cloth was a monk's robe, and the white bones should be the previous long poo of Jade Buddha Temple. It seemed like what Alati had said earlier was not true. Those monks weren't here to serve the power of the 9 spirits. They were here to offer sacrifices to him. However, after thinking about it, Alati was just a small monk. Perhaps he didn't know about this, so I couldn't blame him. With that thought in mind, I didn't pay much attention to it and looked up. The Tai Sui's body was fiery red. This scene reminded me of the time I saw Xiao Jin. Xiao Jin was a golden Tai Sui, while the Tai Sui in front of me was red. When I was in the En Corpse sect, the Heavenly Law's corpse was black. The Tai Sui was born from the Sui star. Could it be that they were also divided into 5 elements? Red and purple represented fire, brown represented earth, white and gold represented metal, black and gray represented water, and green represented wood. Thinking about it, it seemed to make sense. I didn't pay much attention to it before, but since the Tai Sui was divided into 5 elements, I couldn't figure out its function at the moment. At this time, a vague voice came from above. The strength of your Jade Buddha Temple is getting worse. It's been dozens of years, and you've only sent 1 person here. From his tone, it seemed he regarded me as a sacrifice sent by the Jade Buddha Temple. This wasn't surprising to me. I remembered that when I was in the En Corpse sect, the Water Tai Sui wanted to attack me. At that time, the sacrificial evil spirit stopped it with 1 sentence. Not only that, but the Tai Sui also gave me its shaman energy origin. Moreover, when I saw Xiao Jin for the first time, he acted so intimately with me. It seemed that the Tai Sui all knew my identity. From the conversation between the sacrificial evil spirit and the Water Tai Sui, the reason why the Tai Sui were still alive was to complete something. And in this matter, I was the most important link. However, I still couldn't figure out what they were planning. This time, I finally met a living Tai Sui. Perhaps I could get some information from it. With that in mind, I didn't want to talk nonsense with the Tai Sui. I directly said, "Look at me. Who am I?" After hearing my words, the Tai Sui didn't get angry. He lowered his head and looked at me. His eyes were bright. After looking for a long time, his face finally revealed a happy expression. He said, "You're finally here." I wasn't surprised by his words. Earlier, Shidragarva had also mentioned that before Tai Sui left, he told the first abbot of Jade Buddha Temple that there would be a person with 2 types of energy in his body who would come after many years. It was obvious that the Tai Sui knew that I would come here after a few hundred years. That was why he was waiting for me while healing his wounds. I clasped my hands behind my back and looked at him. Then I said with my own accent, "Yes, I'm here." Unexpectedly, the Tai Sui asked with a puzzled face, "Why is your cultivation level so low?" His words made me frown. When I was in the En Corpse sect, when the Tai Sui talked to the sacrificial evil spirit, he was also puzzled. At that time, they said a lot of things that I didn't understand. When I asked the sacrificial evil spirit, he didn't want to tell me. After listening to him, I couldn't help but recall what happened in the past. After pondering for a while, I asked the Tai Sui, "Why are you so puzzled?" The Tai Sui was silent for a moment and didn't answer. It seemed that he was also thinking about it. After a few minutes, he sighed and said, "I don't know if I should tell you about this. However, since you found me, you must know some inside information." Hearing him say that, I was overjoyed. However, I didn't know what he meant by this. Although I had doubts in my heart, I didn't ask anymore. I just quietly waited for him to tell me. Seeing that I didn't respond, the Tai Sui continued. You've seen the metal element Tai Sui, right? I don't understand why you haven't advanced to the Yang God Celestial Master yet. Did something happen? The Tai Sui of the metal attribute that he mentioned should be referring to little gold. It seemed that my previous guess was right. The Tai Sui also had 5 elements. However, according to his logic, it seemed that I had to be a Yang God Celestial Master after seeing Xiao Jin. Moreover, from his tone, I knew that he also knew Xiao Jin. I even had a feeling that they had discussed something. The development of the matter was beyond my expectations. However, my mind was blank, and I couldn't find any clues. After saying that, the Tai Sui didn't speak for a long time. It seemed that he was waiting for my response. Looking at his face, if I didn't tell him the details, I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to get any useful information from him. Thinking of this, I had to tell him the whole story. When he heard that Xiao Jin had gone missing, a look of sudden realization appeared on his face, and he muttered something in a low voice. However, I kept an eye on him and listened to everything he said. He said, "Does he really want to do that?" His words confirmed my previous guess. The Tai Sui and Xiao Jin had discussed something before. However, from his expression, it seemed that Xiao Jin had left to do something. And this matter seemed to have exceeded his expectations, so much so that it disrupted their plans. As for this plan, it must be related to my cultivation base. At this time, my cultivation base was at the Seal Celestial Master Realm. If Xiao Jin hadn't left, according to their plan, I would have become a Yang God Celestial Master. However, if I had become a Yang God Celestial Master, I wouldn't have come to Thailand. However, the Tai Sui seemed to know that I would come here to look for him. From this, it seemed that they had already planned this matter. Presumably, even if I had become a Yang God Celestial Master, I would still need to use the Tai Sui in the future. The Tai Sui suddenly broke the quiet atmosphere. He heaved a long sigh and seemed to have made a compromise. Before I could ask, he spoke first. "I know why you're here. I don't know if what he did was right or wrong. All right, this matter has to be settled." After saying that, he closed his eyes and didn't speak again. Although I was quite eager to advance, I still had a lot of questions to ask him, so I didn't rush to do anything. Seeing that I didn't move, he couldn't help but feel suspicious and asked me why. From his previous behavior, I knew that he wouldn't mention the matter between him and Xiao Jin. That was why I didn't ask about it. I just asked him who had hurt him and why he was in the Haotian Pagoda. After listening to me, he didn't feel surprised. He nodded and told me everything. According to him, he and Xiao Jin were together. However, later on, someone knew what they had discussed. That person then attacked and injured them. At that time, he and Xiao Jin were separated. Hearing that, I was frightened. The person who could injure 2 Tai Sui at the same time couldn't be an ordinary person. I was afraid that only an immortal who had ascended could do that. Thinking about that, I couldn't help but ask him who that person was. Chapter 8:11. Tai Sui's action confused me. I followed his line of sight, but there was only darkness. I couldn't see anything. I asked again, but Tai Sui shook his head as if he didn't want to talk about it. He shook his head and told me that he didn't know where he was going. He ran out of the city and ended up in Thailand. That was how he managed to avoid that man's pursuit. At that time, he was severely wounded. He found a place to recuperate and stayed in the Jade Buddha Temple. As for his conversation with the Jade Buddha Temple's abbot, I've heard it from Shiva. This time, when I listened to his story, it wasn't too different. However, I was interested in what he mentioned later. He said that the Haotian Pagoda had existed before he came here. The abbot didn't know its origin. He just told him that the pagoda could isolate all auras. As long as he hid in the pagoda, no one could find him. At that time, Tai Sui was afraid and worried. When he heard that, he was overjoyed and stayed in the Clear Heaven Pagoda. However, the Jade Buddha Temple's abbot was greedy for his power. He asked Tai Sui to teach the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple their techniques. Under such circumstances, Tai Sui agreed without thinking. In the beginning, when the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple entered the Haotian Pagoda, Tai Sui would spare no effort to teach them. However, as time went by, the origin of the which energy disappeared, and Tai Sui's power weakened. Usually, he didn't have any witch energy to supply. Only when the 4 stars appeared could he get some replenishment. The Jade Buddha temple became bigger and bigger with more monks. As time went by, Tai Sui's witch energy was drained. Later on, he didn't want to give his power to the monks of the Jade Buddha temple anymore. At that time, the Jade Buddha temple had a lot of Long Pu and Zhaokuan cultivators. After the high-level monks had a secret plan, they decided to enter the Haoyan Pagoda to kill Tai Sui and take his witch energy. The crisis ended because those monks underestimated Tai Sui's power. After that, Tai Sui sent out an order. He wanted the Jade Buddha temple's warriors who had reached the Dragon Universal Realm to enter the pagoda to cultivate with him. At the same time, Tai Sui guaranteed the safety of the Jade Buddha temple. At that time, the low-level monks of the Jade Buddha temple didn't know what had happened. They just saw their grandmasters staying in the pagoda and didn't come out, so they agreed to it. This rule was passed down from generation to generation. As for Tai Sui, it devoured the Jade Buddha temple monks that entered the vast heaven pagoda and gradually recovered from its injuries, all the way until today. When I saw those skeletons just now, I just speculated that those Long Pu had become Tai Sui's food, but I didn't expect that there were so many secrets. After listening to the Tai Sui's detailed explanation, he finally understood. I didn't doubt Tai Sui's method, but I felt that the monks of the Jade Buddha temple were a little strange. After so many years, the Long Pu who had come here hadn't shown up again. Didn't they suspect something? Of course, what they think has nothing to do with me. The most important thing right now is to borrow the power of Tai Sui to advance to the Yang God, Celestial Master. As for how to advance, I already know in my heart. It's to devour this Tai Sui. After the devouring, the Tai Sui disappeared. I had an indescribable feeling in my heart, but the Tai Sui didn't care. Instead, he took the initiative to ask me if I had a devouring technique. If I did, I could use a spell to help him. The art of devouring. I immediately thought of the sky-devouring art. According to the records in the death scripture, if this art was cultivated to completion, one could devour the heavens. This meant that it was completely possible to devour the Tai Sui with this art. However, the problem was that I hadn't obtained the second volume of the death scripture for a long time. During this time, I had only cultivated the sky-devouring art to the initial stage. I was still far from the realm where I could devour the Tai Sui. After I explained the situation, the Tai Sui shook his head. He said that if I didn't have a devouring technique, he could only forcefully transfer his power into my body. However, this was dangerous and time-consuming. It would take at least a few years for me to completely absorb it. I naturally didn't want to stay here for a few years. Moreover, there were many things to do in the country. Not to mention anything else, I wouldn't be allowed to disappear for a few years on the other side. With this thought in mind, I couldn't help but feel anxious. I couldn't help but take out the second volume of the death scripture. I found the place where the sky-devouring art was recorded and read it several times. I really wanted to see some shortcut in it, but it was obvious that shortcuts were just wishful thinking, especially on the path of cultivation. However, I definitely wouldn't be willing to give up just like that. After thinking about it, it was better to stay here for the time being and continue cultivating the sky-devouring art. The witchcraft aura here was abundant, which was greatly beneficial to cultivation. Although the sky-devouring art didn't have a shortcut, it wouldn't take a few years. Having made up my mind, I didn't hesitate anymore. After informing the Tai Sui, I immediately put away the death scripture and closed my eyes to cultivate the sky-devouring art. The first layer of the sky-devouring art was to absorb the energy of the opponent's attacks through the skin. The second layer was similar to the sword-devouring art that little Mo's master, the old Taoist Huang Zhu, had imparted to me. This layer seemed to be in preparation for devouring. When I first saw this technique, I felt that it was somewhat evil. However, after putting it into practice, especially after the battle with Old Man Yuan, I changed my previous thoughts. In reality, with my current cultivation, everything is a great Tao. In terms of techniques, there was no longer any distinction between good and evil. It was impossible to cultivate the second layer on my own. Since there was no one else in the clear sky pagoda, I could only ask for Tai Sui's help. Of course, he wouldn't refuse my request. After listening to my detailed explanation, he spat out a mass of air that was wrapped in shamanic aura towards me. I didn't dare to be negligent and hastily operated the sky-devouring art. I suddenly opened my mouth and swallowed the mass of air. That was far from enough. As I circulated the sky-devouring art, I also used the devouring technique that Zhang Canwen had imparted to me to digest the witchcraft aura. In less than a few seconds, the witchcraft aura fused into the veins of the sky and became energy that I could use. At that moment, I was elated. It seemed that the second layer was beginning to bear fruit. I had to be more familiar with it to cultivate to the third layer. Time passed in the pagoda. I didn't know how much time had passed, but I finally cultivated the second layer to the extreme. However, I wasn't in a hurry to look at the third layer. Haste makes waste. If I were to rush to the next step, it would be very difficult to comprehend it. As such, I calmed myself down and stabilized the previous two layers. If I could comprehend something from them, the next layer would naturally come naturally. Thus, I calmed myself down and leaned against the wall of the clear sky pagoda to meditate. In the blink of an eye, I didn't know how much time had passed. When I opened my eyes, I already had a vague understanding of the third layer of the sky-devouring art. Only then did I take out the second volume of the Death Scripture. After flipping through the third layer of the cultivation method, I verified it with what I had obtained in my heart. I finally understood, and everything became clear. After completely comprehending the sky-devouring art, there was no need for me to delay any longer. After circulating the cultivation method once, I stood up and asked Tai Sui, "Are you ready?" He had been waiting for this moment for thousands of years. He appeared to be even more impatient than I was. After hearing my question, he nodded abruptly. He didn't have the slightest bit of sorrow for having to sacrifice himself. To be honest, I only roughly knew the story behind this. However, looking at Tai Sui at that moment, I couldn't help but feel an indescribable heaviness in my heart. I opened my mouth but couldn't say anything. After a while, I could only cup my hands at him and close my eyes to circulate the sky-devouring art. As I circulated the cultivation method, I felt my body become light after a few seconds, and I slowly floated into the air. Then, under my control, the aura in my body flowed backward as if it wanted to burst every pore in my body. This tearing feeling wasn't any less painful than when my cultivation had been destroyed. Fortunately, the pain came suddenly and left quickly. After a while, the feeling disappeared, and I returned to my previous state. This comfortable feeling didn't last long. Soon, the aura flowing backward from my body turned into several ropes that flew toward Tai Sui, entangling its neck and limbs. After a while, Tai Sui's face contorted as if it was suffering from indescribable torture. The ropes became tighter and tighter, as if they were about to split Tai Sui into several pieces. During this process, the ropes constantly emitted witchcraft aura that enveloped Tai Sui. The witchcraft aura became denser and denser. In the end, Tai Sui was completely wrapped up like a cocoon. I could sense that Tai Sui's aura had completely disappeared at this moment. With my cultivation alone, I couldn't summon so much witchcraft aura. It was obvious that most of the witchcraft aura was forced out of Tai Sui's body. Then, the witchcraft aura kept spinning, and the witchcraft aura in it became denser and denser. When the spinning speed was so fast that I couldn't see it clearly, it suddenly flew up and hit my body. I couldn't bear the violent impact. My eyes rolled up and I passed out. Before I passed out, I vaguely saw Tai Sui's shadow in my life palace. He suddenly appeared there and swallowed my 3 souls. Then he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. Above his head, the black and white celestial master seal was floating there, spinning constantly. When I woke up again, I didn't know how much time had passed. I felt as if I was soaking in a hot spring, which was indescribably comfortable and warm. Recalling what had happened before, I immediately sat up and looked inside my life palace. Just as I had seen before, Tai Sui's figure was still in his life palace. The three souls were nowhere to be seen, and the seal above his head had also disappeared. However, I could clearly feel the aura of the three souls in Tai Sui's body. Previously, I had heard Nangong say that the Yang god, celestial master of the Wu tribe, used Tai Sui as his Yang god. It should be like this. I had also heard Yin Nantian mention the matter of the three souls fusing with the seal. He said that the Yang god was formed by the gathering of the three souls in the seal. Judging from my current state, I had obviously advanced to the Yang god celestial master level. However, it was different from the Yang god of the Wu tribe and the Dao Qi Yang god. My Yang god was formed by Tai Sui devouring the three souls. The Dao Qi and witchcraft aura had merged into one. Compared to others, it was naturally far better. Not to mention the joy in my heart, I spent a few minutes calming down and tried to summon the Yang god. However, since I had just advanced, my realm was far from stable. After the Yang god that looked like Tai Sui appeared above my head, it only lasted for a few seconds. Then, I felt that my cultivation was instantly sucked out, and I couldn't hold on any longer. Even so, in just a few seconds, I felt a godlike power. Although I was sitting cross-legged on the ground, in my consciousness, I felt as if I was standing on the dome, overlooking all living beings under my feet. This should be the power of the Yang god. Of course, there were still many mysteries of the Yang god, but I couldn't hold on for too long. I could only slowly explore it later. Now that the matter was over, I planned to leave immediately. However, after I got up, I recalled the conflict between me and the monks of Jinshan Temple and thought for a while. Jinshan Temple's Long Pu had been injured by me, so I didn't think he would let it go. My realm was not stable at the moment. If I went out now and met Jinshan Temple's Long Pu or even Zhao Kuan, I was afraid that it would be difficult for me to deal with them. Thinking of this, I gave up the idea of leaving the tower and sat down again. After devouring Tai Sui, my cultivation was raised to the Yang god level. A part of Tai Sui's majestic witchcraft aura was also left in my heaven veins. At this time, I could take advantage of the opportunity to consolidate my cultivation and refine it. In this way, I could also raise my cultivation to the early stage of the Yang god level. In this way, I could completely stabilize my cultivation. Soon, the witchcraft aura had circulated dozens of times in my body, and my cultivation had finally stabilized at the early stage of the Yang god celestial master level. Chapter 8:12. Just as I was about to get out of the pagoda, I found a big problem. When I came here, I carefully observed that there were no doors or windows around the Haotian pagoda. I was sucked in by Tai Sui. I wanted to get out, but I didn't know how to do it. Just now, I only cared about advancing to the Yang god celestial master level, but I forgot to ask Tai Sui how to get out of the pagoda. What should I do? Although my cultivation had reached the Yang god level, which was many times stronger than before, the Haotian pagoda was an ancient divine weapon. It was impossible to get out by force. After thinking for a while, I searched around but found nothing. I had no choice but to sit cross-legged and call out Tai Sui's Yang god in my life palace. After the previous cultivation, I had reached the early stage of the Yang god level. After calling out Tai Sui's Yang god, I could hold on for a while, unlike before when I couldn't hold on for a few seconds. Tai Sui's Yang god was still the same as before, but it was much smaller. It was only the height of a palm. In addition, there was an obvious mark in the middle of its forehead. The shape of the mark was complicated, and because Tai Sui's body was too small, I couldn't see it clearly. I didn't know whether this change was good or bad. Nangong hadn't told me about the specific situation of Tai Sui's Yang god, so I could only study it later. After calling out Tai Sui's Yang god, I drove the Yang god to walk around the Haotian pagoda. In my opinion, since Haotian pagoda could be entered and exited, there must be an entrance. The reason why I couldn't see it now was probably because Tai Sui had set up some restrictions. Generally speaking, restrictions could distinguish the owner. Since Tai Sui had died, he couldn't open it. I could only hope that Tai Sui, who had turned into a Yang god, could still drive the restrictions. I I was thinking about this, but after walking around, I was disappointed that Haotian Pagoda still didn't move. It didn't even show the restrictions, let alone drive them. I couldn't help but feel discouraged. I couldn't support the Yang god anymore, so I had to take it back. I sat cross-legged on the ground, recovering my cultivation while thinking about this matter. Since Tai Sui didn't work, I could only consider this problem from the Haotian Pagoda itself. It was said that Haotian Pagoda belonged to Tai Hao Fushi. If the way to get in and out had nothing to do with Tai Sui, then it must be related to Tai Hao Fushi. According to the ancient records, Fushi was the son of Sui Renshi. They were also written as Mi Shi, Pao Shi, Bao Shi, and Fu Shi. They were also called Shi Huang, Huang Shi, and Tai Hao. They were called Fu Shi in historical records. He was also known as the Azure Emperor and was one of the 5 heavenly emperors. He was the ancestor of the Chinese people and one of the 3 emperors. As the ancestor of Huaxia, Fushi's contribution to the entire Chinese civilization was naturally huge. Legend has it that he created characters and ended the history of knotting ropes to record events. He also made nets out of ropes to catch birds and hunt. He also taught people how to fish and hunt, invented the zither, composed songs, and so on. But among all his contributions, the most important was his invention of the 8 trigrams based on the changes of all things in the world. According to the legends, Fushi sat on the square altar and listened to the chi of the 8 winds, which was the 8 trigrams. The 8 trigrams gave rise to the Book of Changes, which created the Chinese civilization. Because he created the 8 trigrams, people worshipped him as a god and honored him as the patriarch of the 8 trigrams. Hence, this vast heaven pagoda's control method was most likely inseparable from the 8 trigrams. In this way, things became much clearer. However, in the 8 trigrams, Qian, Zhen, Kan, Jin, Kun, Sun, Li, and Dui, the 8 directions could give rise to the 9 palaces. If everyone was here with Fatty's formation, we might be able to find the clues quickly. But if I were to rely on myself, it would be difficult to find the method in a short period of time. However, when I mentioned the 9 palaces, I suddenly recalled the time when we were in Billows Mountain. We had once fallen into the 9 palaces displacement formation in the forest. Since this vast heaven pagoda was related to the 8 trigrams 9 palaces, then could the 9 palaces displacement formation be related to this vast heaven pagoda? This idea was naturally my whimsical thinking, but I didn't have any other method at the moment, so I might as well give it a try. Thinking that way, I started to recall the trajectory of the 9 palaces displacement formation in my mind. My feet naturally stepped forward. I didn't know how long had passed, but a gust of wind suddenly swept out of the vast heaven pagoda. Seeing this, I was elated. It seemed that this footwork was effective. After a few seconds, the gust of wind returned, but it didn't bring back anything. In a blink of an eye, everything returned to normal. Even so, I had some thoughts in my mind. It was true that this Bugang could activate the vast heaven pagoda, but it could only teleport things outside the pagoda into the pagoda. If I wanted to leave the pagoda, using this Bugang wouldn't work. I wasn't discouraged. As long as I studied the trajectory of the 9 palaces displacement formation, I should be able to find a way to leave the pagoda. Thinking that way, I didn't dare to be negligent. The trajectory of the 9 palaces displacement formation kept flashing in my mind. However, no matter how I changed this Bugang, I couldn't activate the vast heaven pagoda again. As I thought, I had an idea. Everything has yin and yang, and everything has its pros and cons. If I were to deduce it in reverse, I might be able to gain something. Thinking that way, my feet started to move. I didn't think that just as I took a step, there would be a response from the vast heaven pagoda. I heard a whistling sound in my surroundings. Normally, this sound would make people annoyed, but at this moment, it was exceptionally pleasing to the ear. Seeing that there was a sudden change, I couldn't help but quicken my footsteps. After 5 to 6 minutes, I finally took a step out of the Bugang. When my footsteps landed, a dusky smoke swirled in my surroundings, wrapping my body within. In just a few seconds, the smoke dispersed. The scene in front of me made me happy. Currently, I was standing in the cave outside of the vast heaven pagoda. This place was still as calm as before. I didn't want to stay here any longer, so I walked up the stone stairs. I had originally intended to bring the vast heaven pagoda away. After all, it was one of the 10 ancient godly instruments. This item's power was immense, so it should have other uses. However, after thinking about it, the vast heaven pagoda was too big, so I couldn't bring it along. Furthermore, this item belonged to the Jade Buddha Temple. Taking it away without permission was against the rules. If I had a use for it in the future, I would come back to ask for it. 15 minutes later, I returned to the position I came from. I didn't think too much about it. I circulated the shaman energy in my body to both my hands, then stretched towards the wall. I didn't think that my palm would really pass through the wall. I didn't delay any longer. I circulated my shaman energy to wrap my entire body within. Then I took a step forward. From then on, I walked out of the cave. However, after I stood still, I realized that the surrounding weeds had all withered. Previously, Shalampo had said that he would wait for me here, but when I looked around, I didn't see him. I thought that it was because I had been in there for too long. Since Shalampo was the abbot of the Jade Buddha Temple, he naturally had to deal with the miscellaneous affairs in the temple, so he left. I didn't mind it too much, so I walked towards the Jade Buddha Hall, preparing to bid farewell to Shalampo. On the way, I recalled what had happened earlier. The movement of the vast heaven pagoda and the trajectory of the 9 palaces shift in empty billows made me link the two together. The 9 palaces shift formation was equivalent to the mountain protection formation. Moreover, it used the Eastern Emperor Bell as the eye of the formation. The Eastern Emperor Bell and the vast heaven pagoda were both the 10 godly instruments. Both of them had immense power. Previously, when I was in the Penglai immortal realm, I vaguely felt that the place was similar to MT Billows. Vast Heaven Pagoda, MT Billows, Penglai immortal realm. There was obviously a hidden connection between the three. However, I only knew about the war between the human race and the monster race. As for what had happened before that, I had never heard of it. If I wanted to know the cause and effect, I would have to ask the sacrificial evil spirit. While I was thinking, I suddenly heard someone shouting in front of me. I lifted my head and saw a monk wearing a red monk robe rushing toward me. As soon as he arrived in front of me, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed several times. Then, he started to speak in a loud voice. Previously, when Shalampo brought me to the wasteland, we passed by a courtyard, and I met this person. I wasn't surprised that he was so respectful to me. However, I didn't know why he was panicking. While talking, he pointed in the direction of a Jade Buddha Hall. Although I didn't understand what he was saying, from his expression, I could guess that something had happened at the Jade Buddha Hall. Considering what had happened before, I guessed that the people of the Jinshan Temple had come to find us. The relationship between the Jinshan Temple and the Jade Buddha Temple had always been tense. Moreover, after what I had done, they would definitely take the opportunity to pick a fight with us. This time, it was because of me, so I couldn't avoid it. However, I couldn't leave Thailand for the time being, so I had to stay here for a while. I nodded and signaled the monk to get up. Then, I walked toward the Jade Buddha Hall. Before I reached the hall, I heard some noises coming from the Jade Buddha Hall. However, I didn't understand what they were talking about, so I didn't know what they were arguing about. Soon, I arrived at the Jade Buddha Hall. At this moment, I saw many monks surrounding the hall. They were divided into 2 groups. One group consisted of the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple, including Shalampo and Alati. As for the other group, most of them were unfamiliar faces, and the ones sitting upright were elderly monks. Their cultivation bases weren't weak. The weakest among them was at the later stage of the Seal realm. At this moment, they were talking to each other. Most of the noise I had heard earlier had come from their mouths. However, in the middle of these people was an old monk with a white beard. He was resting with his eyes closed, giving off an otherworldly aura. Chapter 8:13. It was extremely difficult to advance further. That was why, after reaching the Yang God realm, the difference in one's cultivation base was like the difference between heaven and earth. Although I had the power to fight against the Yang God Heavenly Master when I was still in the Seal realm, I didn't dare to underestimate this old monk who was at least at the middle stage of the Yang God realm. After looking at him for a while, I looked behind him and saw a familiar face. It was Long Pakue, the one I had almost killed in the forest behind Wulong Baiman Palace. From this, my previous guess was correct. These monks came from Jinshan Temple. They'd sent Long Pu. It seemed they wouldn't let this matter go easily. At this moment, the two sides were still quarreling, so I didn't hurry to show up. I stood aside and observed the situation. If they had other intentions, I didn't need to go out and look for trouble. Having made up my mind, I deliberately moved closer to the crowd. There were many monks here who didn't recognize me, so I didn't need to worry about being exposed. After a while, the monk who was resting with his eyes closed suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes glowed fiercely as he spat out an evil energy toward Alati. My heart tightened. Had I been exposed? Did Long Pu want to use this method to force me to show up? Although Alati and I didn't have a close relationship, I had a good impression of him. Thinking about this, I didn't think too much about it. I leaped and arrived in front of Alati. At the same time, the shaman energy in my body formed a barrier in front of me, ready to resist this attack. Perhaps Long Pu cared about his reputation, so he didn't use his full strength. The moment the Inshi came into contact with the barrier, it dissipated in the air. The first one to react was Long Pu. He squinted and looked at me, speaking fluent Chinese. You've been watching for a long time. Finally, you're willing to come out. After listening to him, I frowned. Long Pu's strength wasn't bad, but he was also very cunning. It seemed like a simple sentence, but he wanted to sow discord between the Jade Buddha Temple and me. If it had been someone else, his scheme might have succeeded. However, he didn't know how noble my identity was in Sarangpo's eyes. When Sharapala saw me, she looked happy. She bent her body and was about to kneel in front of me. Right now, I can't let the monks of Jinshan Temple know my identity. Since Jinshan Temple is looking for trouble with me, there is no need to involve Jade Buddha Temple. Otherwise, after I leave, the Jade Buddha Temple will not have a peaceful day. With that in mind, I shot Shirapana a look. He seemed to understand what I was thinking and quickly stopped his body. Aladi finally came back to his senses. He thanked me softly. I waved my hand, indicating that there was no need to stand on ceremony. Immediately after, I walked towards Long Pu and faintly said, I don't know why the High Monk of Jinshan Temple has come today. Long Pu didn't seem to like talking with his head raised. He stood up, smiled, and replied softly, Don't tell me you don't know. When I saw his expression, it was no different from that of Monk Miaojua, which made me feel disgusted. I didn't want to talk nonsense with him. How do you want to end the grudge between me and the Jinshan Temple? After listening to my words, Long Pu nodded and said, In just a month, you have reached the primary Yang God Celestial Master Realm. Your talent is excellent. You injured my Jinshan Temple's dragon grandmother for no reason. I originally wanted to abolish your cultivation. However, I also know that cultivation is not easy. It is even more difficult for you to have such a cultivation. Therefore, I will spare you today. However, you can be exempted from the crime, but the Jade Buddha Temple cannot escape the crime of shielding you. I need something from the Jade Buddha Temple in exchange. This was obviously his real purpose. It had been a month since I had injured Dragon Grandmother Koei. Jinshan Temple hadn't come looking for me, but they had come now. It was definitely premeditated for a long time. However, I still had some doubts. The Jade Buddha Temple didn't have a high monk above Long Pu, but it had a high status. Logically speaking, it should have been coveted by others. Jinshan Temple didn't make trouble before, so why did they suddenly choose to make trouble now? If they couldn't find a reason before, it seemed impossible to use my reason now. When a wolf hunted its prey, it wouldn't be reasonable. With a great disparity in power, it didn't even need to use sophistry. Something must have happened recently that made Jinshan Temple lose its scruples. I leaned to one side and whispered, What happened during the past month? Hearing me mention it, Lord Shurlong's face turned bitter. He sighed and explained the situation to me in detail. From him, I learned that Thai Buddhism wasn't as aloof as the Chinese Buddhism. Every 3 years, the Thai Buddhism temple would hold a grand competition to determine the ranking of the temples. Due to the special history of the Jade Buddha Temple, it hadn't participated in the previous competitions. The result of the competition didn't affect its status. This year, it was time for the grand competition. Just like the previous years, Lord Shurlong planned to go to the royal palace to discuss the rules of the competition with the king. However, he didn't expect that the king would ask the Jade Buddha Temple to participate in this year's competition. Although the king of Thailand didn't meddle in worldly affairs, his words carried enormous weight when it came to religious affairs. Lord Shurlong was puzzled. Why did the king suddenly make such a decision? The king didn't answer. At this moment, the Jade Buddha Temple wasn't strong enough. In the entire temple, he was the only one with the title of Lord Shurlong. Long Pu had been sent to serve the power of the 9 spirits. He couldn't come and go as he pleased. However, this was the Jade Buddha Temple's secret. It couldn't be disclosed to the public or the king. Otherwise, the situation would be even worse. In a hurry, Lord Shurlong had to use the excuse that all the senior monks in the temple were old to ask the king to take back his order. Unexpectedly, the king was enraged. If you don't participate, the Jade Buddha Temple will move out of the palace. If the Jade Buddha Temple moved out of the palace, it would mean that they would lose the support of the government. With their current strength, they would be ranked at the bottom among the other temples. Helplessly, he had to accept the proposal. After returning to the temple, Lord Shurlong still couldn't figure out why this had happened. Due to the special status of the Jade Buddha Temple, the other temples had always been jealous of it, especially the Jinshan Temple. It wasn't strange for those temples to use all kinds of means to compete with each other. However, the problem was that the Jade Buddha Temple had always been a royal temple. The entire royal family had always stood on the Jade Buddha Temple's side. This time, the king's sudden change in attitude was really strange. As he couldn't figure out the reason, Lord Shurlong didn't want to dwell on it anymore. Since the king had given the order, the Jade Buddha Temple had to follow it. The final result of the competition wasn't unexpected. The Jade Buddha Temple was ranked at the bottom. According to the rules, the Jade Buddha Temple had to give up its Thai Buddhist first seat. Although Lord Shurlong wasn't willing, he couldn't change the result. He had to follow the rules. However, Long Pu Zhuang of the Jinshan Temple stood up and suggested to the king that since the Jade Buddha Temple had lost its first seat, they should move out of the palace and give up their first seat. When the king heard this, he didn't agree immediately. He said that the Jade Buddha Temple's matter was very important. The royal family needed to discuss it before making a decision. At this critical moment, the people of the Jinshan Temple couldn't wait to come to the Jade Buddha Temple. After listening to him, I furrowed my brows and started to ponder. Lord Shurlong had mentioned that the king's attitude had changed. Combined with Long Pu Zhuang's suggestion, I guessed that the king and the Jinshan Temple had made a deal. I didn't know what kind of enticing conditions Jinshan Temple had offered to make the king give up a temple that was of great significance to the Buddhist sect. I couldn't guess the reason for this at the moment. However, based on the words of Jinshan Temple's Long Pu, regardless of the conspiracy behind them, their objective today was obviously an item from the Jade Buddha Temple that he mentioned. As for causing trouble for me, it was naturally just an excuse. He might be able to unravel the conspiracy behind them by starting with this item. I immediately asked Lord Shurlong, "What kind of treasures do you have in the Jade Buddha Temple?" Unexpectedly, he shook his head and said, "Except for some ancient books, there's nothing valuable in the Jade Buddha Temple." After listening to him, I became more skeptical. Buddhist books were indeed attractive to Buddhists. However, since the Jinshan Temple had been fighting against the Jade Buddha Temple for so many years, it must have a profound foundation. Especially since Long Pu had a high cultivation base, he wouldn't lack Buddhist books. It was obvious that he didn't want these things. Did Lord Shurlong not tell me the truth? When I asked him again, Lord Shurlong gave me a wry smile. It's a matter of life and death. If there's a treasure, I'd rather take it out to protect the entire temple. I won't hide it. His words were sincere. Apparently, he wasn't lying. However, since the Jinshan Temple had come to the Jade Buddha Temple, they must have some information. Otherwise, they wouldn't have acted rashly. Perhaps the treasure really existed, but Lord Shurlong didn't know about it. Or exchanging the treasure was just a pretext, and the real purpose was something else. It seemed only the people of the Jinshan Temple knew the details of this matter. However, Jinshan Temple's Long Pu's strength wasn't ordinary. It would take a lot of effort to get information from him. After thinking for a while, I had a plan. I walked forward and said to Jinshan Temple's Long Pu, "We've discussed it. No matter what you want, as long as you can defeat me, you can take that thing." The Jade Buddha Temple won't say anything. Hearing me, Long Pu's eyes flashed with a trace of ridicule. Apparently, he thought that my Yang spirit realm was not enough to compete with him. However, what I said was exactly what he wanted. He didn't talk nonsense and nodded. After he agreed, I continued, "You and I both have Yang spirit realm cultivation base. This place is narrow, so we can't fight freely. However, there's a wasteland behind the Jade Buddha Temple. It's quite spacious there. Why don't we fight there?" After listening to me, Jinshan Temple's Long Pu didn't respond, but Shaprufferus was frightened. He hurried to pull my sleeve. I knew that he was afraid that Jinshan Temple's Long Pu would discover the secret of that wasteland. However, I had a plan in mind, so I just nodded to him, indicating that he didn't need to worry. Lord Shurlong was still worried, but since I had made my decision, he couldn't say anything else. Jinshan Temple's Long Pu pondered for a while, and then agreed with an expressionless face. After that, Long Pu and I left the other people and left the Jade Buddha Temple. We soared up and flew toward the wasteland one after the other. Although the Jade Buddha Temple was big, with our speed, we landed on the wasteland in a few seconds. As soon as we landed, Jinshan Temple's Long Pu's face changed. His eyes were full of surprise and joy. It was obvious that he had found something. I had guessed that the Haoyan Pagoda had been exposed. Seeing Long Pu's appearance, my guess was confirmed. Chapter 8:14. This barren land was the forbidden area of the Jade Buddha Temple. Even the monks of the temple could not come here without permission, let alone the monks of the Jinshan Temple, who had been hostile to them for many years. It was hard to know how Long Pu found out about this. But looking at him now, it was obvious that he had been planning this for a long time. From this, it was obvious that the Jade Buddha Temple was not united. Since someone had set their eyes on the Haoyan Pagoda, I also wanted to fight for it. After all, it was one of the 10 great ancient divine weapons. It was not right for me to see it wander outside the territory. While I was thinking, Long Pu's expression had returned to normal. He glanced around and turned to me. "Kid, we have arrived. Let's not talk anymore. Let's do it." I smiled and did not say anything. I took out the armor-removing sword, mobilized all the witchcraft energy in my body, and slashed at Long Pu's face. This casual attack naturally could not hurt him, but I just wanted to test his strength. Long Pu seemed to have seen through my thoughts as he waved his hand to repel the armor-removing sword chi before snorting coldly. "Don't waste time. Use whatever means you have. If that's all you have, I advise you to surrender." I still ignored him. I stepped on the 9 stars Heavenly Dipper and attacked him again. This time, I added the power of the Heavenly Dipper step, so its power was much stronger than before. Long Pu finally became serious. He raised his mouth and spat out an evil energy to meet the armor-removing sword chi. In the blink of an eye, the two energies collided, stirring up waves of air that swept in all directions, uprooting all the weeds in the surrounding area. After a while, the smoke and dust dissipated. The two of us were still standing in the same place, staring at each other. Although I did not use my full strength in that attack, Long Pu resolved it so easily. His strength was really terrifying. Could it be that he was already at the late stage of Yang Spirit? If that was the case, it was no wonder that he had ridiculed me before. He did have the ability to do so. The difference between the early stage and the late stage of Yang Spirit was like a moat. If it was someone else, it would be almost impossible for them to be his match. But he met me, so he was unlucky. I have 2 kinds of aura of witchcraft in my body, and I am talented. When I was in the seal stage, I could fight against the Yangshin Celestial Master. Now that I have the cultivation of the early stage of Yangshan, it is not difficult for me to deal with ordinary people at the middle stage of Yangshan. On the other hand, the cultivators of the Wu tribe use Tai Sui as the Yang god, so their strength surpassed that of the Tao Qi Yang god celestial master. As for Long Pu of the Jinshan temple, he cultivated the inferior spells of the outer realm. With the accumulation of many advantages with my current strength, I am not at a disadvantage when dealing with Long Pu at the late stage of the Yang god. Through the previous 2 tests, I found that the breath exhaled by Long Pu was similar to Yin energy, but it was even more evil. I didn't gain much of an advantage when I fought with my shaman Qi. Moreover, there is a great disparity between our realms, so I was at a slight disadvantage just now. If I used the power of extreme Yang, I might be able to restrain his evil Yin energy. This is something that I had already realized when I was fighting against Dragon Matron Kuei, and now I am even more certain about it. After accepting the Tai Sui as the Yang god, my Taoist Qi cultivation also reached the Yang god phase. In addition, the Dragon Qi in the Jade bracelet is quite abundant. As long as this battle continues, the final victor will be me. While I was thinking, Long Pu opened his mouth again. Unlike the teasing from before, his expression was much more serious this time, and he said furiously, "No wonder you dare to challenge me. You do have some ability, but the gap between our realms isn't as simple as you think. Please enlighten me." I laughed heartily and didn't say anything else. I stepped on the heavenly dipper again and infused the armor-removing sword with pure Yang energy. Then I swung it again. As soon as I swung my sword, Long Pu clearly felt the change in his aura. His expression immediately changed. He was obviously confused. His surprised expression gave me an opportunity. The sword energy in my hand moved even faster, and in the blink of an eye, it reached Long Pu. Only then did he react. He quickly spat out evil Yin energy and formed a barrier in front of him, trying to resist the attack. His thought process was simple, but the armor-removing sword energy was different from before. With the addition of pure Yang energy, the armor-removing sword energy collided with the barrier. It was like fire melting ice. The barrier instantly turned into dust, while the armor-removing sword energy didn't lose much of its power. It headed straight for his face. Long Pu's expression turned ugly. He obviously didn't expect that my attack would be so powerful. Hence, he didn't dare to take it head-on and leaped in an attempt to avoid it. I already had a plan in mind. How could I let him succeed? As he moved, I had already moved in front of him. I lifted my leg and kicked at his waist. Under the pincer attack, Long Pu couldn't avoid it and took the kick head-on. At the same time, the armor-removing sword energy in my hand changed direction and slashed at where he was going to land. With a loud explosion, Long Pu was hit by the armor-removing sword energy again. His body flew a few meters back, leaving a trail of blood on the ground. Taking advantage of his weakness, I didn't give him any chance to catch his breath and followed closely behind him. However, Long Pu wasn't a kind person. He quickly stood up, the anger in his eyes burning. "Kid, I admit that I have underestimated you. However, I will use my full strength. Today, I will crush your bones and scatter your ashes." Although his words were fierce, I knew that his true strength wasn't as weak as what he had displayed earlier. Therefore, I didn't dare to lower my guard. I quickly stopped and carefully watched his movements. Suddenly, a Buddhist tablet appeared in his hands. The appearance of this Buddhist tablet wasn't clear, but just like Long Pu, the moment the Buddhist tablet appeared, a shadow of Sakyamuni appeared on it. Although I had seen Sakyamuni's shadow in Long Pu's hands, this Long Pu was at the late stage of Yang God. When he used the same move, the power was incomparable. I became cautious and retreated a few steps. At the same time, I continuously transferred the Tao energy in my body to the armor-removing sword. When the armor-removing sword energy was full, the shadow of Sakyamuni came out of the Buddhist tablet. As soon as it landed, it stretched out its palms to attack me. In the face of the power of the Buddha's palms, I didn't dare to be careless. I stepped out of the 9-star Heavenly Dipper and swung the armor-removing sword. A powerful sword energy rushed towards the two palms. In the blink of an eye, they collided. Although I was prepared, I still underestimated Long Pu's methods. The moment the armor-removing sword energy hit the shadow, it exploded, and the Tao energy scattered in all directions. However, the shadow of Sakyamuni didn't move, and the attack of the Buddha's palms didn't weaken in the slightest. My heart trembled. Before I could react, the Buddha's palms were already in front of me. I didn't have time to defend myself, so I could only jump to the side. Before I could stabilize myself, the Buddha's palms had already landed on the ground. With a loud explosion, a large crater with a diameter of several meters appeared on the ground. Immediately after, the shadow of Sakyamuni chased after me and attacked me again. The previous attack had consumed more than half of my Tao energy. I didn't have enough time to replenish it, so I could only activate the shaman energy in my body and send the remaining Tao energy into the armor-removing sword to meet the Buddha's palms. Using all my strength to defend, the situation was much better than before. After colliding with the Buddha's palms, the armor-removing sword energy didn't collapse immediately. However, it couldn't break through the Buddha's palms either. Unexpectedly, the Buddha's amulet continued to produce evil energy and sent it to the shadow of Sakyamuni. On the other hand, the armor-removing sword energy was in a stalemate and hadn't been replenished. It was gradually losing ground. Seeing this, I immediately reached for the jade bracelet in front of my chest. Taking advantage of the stalemate, I quickly replenished my Tao energy. After a minute, the armor-removing sword energy couldn't withstand the power of the Buddha's palms anymore and dispersed. However, I didn't panic. During this time, I had used the true dragon chi in the jade bracelet to recover more than half of my Tao energy. After destroying the armor-removing sword energy, the power of the Buddha's palms didn't decrease. It took advantage of the situation and headed straight for my face. At this moment, I didn't dare to hold back anymore. I opened my mouth and took out the Xianyuan sword. Previously, I had recovered my Tao energy in order to activate the Xianyuan sword. After I spat out the sword, Long Pu's expression instantly turned grave. Although the Xianyuan sword's name wasn't known to the outside world, Long Pu naturally sensed it in the face of such a divine weapon. While he was frowning, I continued to send Tao energy into the Xianyuan sword. After I had exhausted the last bit of Tao energy in my body, I threw the Xianyuan sword into the air to meet the Buddha's palms. The Xianyuan sword's power was far greater than the armor-removing sword energy. Although I had only poured 70 to 80% of the Tao energy in my body, the Buddha's palms had already been partially consumed by the armor-removing sword energy. After the two collided, the Xianyuan sword easily cut through the Buddha's palms and flew straight for Sakyamuni's torso. At this moment, I finally heaved a sigh of relief. I immediately turned my gaze to Long Pu of Jinshan Temple. At this moment, the Xianyuan sword was enough to withstand the power of the Buddha's amulet. Next, I had to kill Long Pu to completely end this battle. At this moment, Long Pu seemed to have also sensed the danger. He ignored my gaze and stared at the Xianyuan sword. Then, he quickly cut the tip of his middle finger. A drop of blood spurted out, and he flicked it towards the Buddha's amulet. Seeing his actions, my gaze also froze. The middle finger was the tip of a person's finger. It was where the heart's blood gathered. Since he had used his fingertip blood, it was obvious that he was going to fight with his life on the line. After the fingertip blood landed on the Buddha's amulet, the originally dark Buddha's amulet was gradually dyed red. In the blink of an eye, the Buddha's amulet, which was as tall as a person, completely turned blood red. Following this change, the Buddha's amulet, which was originally illusory, solidified and was also dyed blood red. After this change, the situation immediately changed. The Xianyuan sword was no longer as sharp as before. It only flew a few meters forward before it was blocked by the solidified Buddha's amulet, unable to advance any further. Although the Xianyuan sword's power was unparalleled, it also consumed a terrifying amount of energy to activate it. Taking advantage of the fact that his previous drive had yet to be unleashed, it was already impossible for him to summon it again. On the other side, Long Pu's face was deathly pale. It seemed that the drop of blood from his fingertip had consumed a lot of energy. In this situation, I still had a slight upper hand. After all, I had only consumed the cultivation in my body, while he had consumed a precious drop of blood from his fingertip. However, this slight advantage could not be turned into a victory. After thinking for a long time, I clenched my teeth and made up my mind. If I wanted to defeat the Buddha's amulet, I still had to use the Yang spirit. If I couldn't defeat the Buddha's amulet, I would still be in danger with its endless aura supporting me. After confirming this, I no longer hesitated. With a thought, I summoned the Yang spirit. In my current state, it was not enough to activate the Yang spirit. After summoning it, I immediately sat cross-legged and used the true dragon chi in the jade bracelet to replenish my Taoist chi. At the same time, I quickly refined the remaining sorcery chi in my body and continuously sent it to the Yang spirit to support the consumption of the Yang spirit. Chapter 8:15. The Tai Sui's Yang spirit was fast. In the blink of an eye, it was several meters away from the Buddha statue. Under my control, it stopped. It was the first time I had to use the Yang spirit to fight an enemy, but I didn't panic. I recalled a hand seal recorded in the death scripture that required the Yang spirit to work with me. I hurried to perform the hand seal. The Tai Sui, hovering next to the Sakyamuni Buddha statue, followed my movements and performed the hand seal. While I performed the hand seal, I didn't feel any power. However, the Tai Sui was different. In just a blink of an eye, a sharp aura shot out from its hands and dashed toward the Sakyamuni Buddha statue. I didn't expect that the Buddha statue would suddenly show a trace of fear and retreat. This surprised me. It turned out this Buddha statue had a mind of its own. No wonder it moved so fast. It didn't seem like it needed to be controlled. From my experience fighting against the Nanyang Taoist sects, this amulet was similar to the ghost-raising sect's ghost-raising technique. However, I couldn't figure out why Long Pu's amulet had a Sakyamuni statue. It seemed the Nanyang's evil techniques had some tricks up their sleeves. While I was thinking, the Buddha statue had retreated a long distance. However, it didn't wait for its death. It put its palms together in front of its chest and mumbled something. It sounded like the rhythm of a Buddhist scripture. However, I didn't know Thai, so I didn't know what technique it was. A few seconds later, it stopped chanting and slowly spread its palms. I could clearly see a Buddhist swastika in black between its palms. Seeing this symbol, I was startled. This swastika was very famous. In Sanskrit, it was read as the auspicious appearance of the clouds and the sea. It was a symbol of good fortune between the clouds and the sea. It was painted on Buddha's chest, and Buddhists considered it an auspicious appearance because it could emit precious light. It was said to have thousands of colors. The swastika was also an ancient and mysterious pattern in the world. It was worshipped as a symbol of the sun or fire. In ancient India, Persia, and Greece, it was used as a talisman, amulet, and religious symbol. Moreover, this swastika was the supreme symbol of Buddhism, which could subdue all evil forces. But other than that, these words had another bloody and terrifying meaning. Back then, the German Nazis used them as a symbol of violence and bloodshed during their reign. Although the black swastika had appeared from the Sakyamuni statue, it was clearly not the supreme seal of Buddhism. It was most likely a trick of Long Pu's. Nanyang's sorcery was ultimately derived from Huaxia's metaphysics. After 1,000 years, some of the sorcery had changed so much that it was impossible to tell its original form. For example, this swastika was most likely the product of a combination of a certain Huaxia metaphysics technique and a Buddhist seal. No matter what, judging from the aura emitted by the swastika, the power of this move must be very strong. I don't know if my Yang spirit can withstand it. While he was thinking, The dark swastika had already collided with the Tai Sui Yang god's handprint. In a flash, the two forces exploded, rolling up the sky. Under the tyrannical power, even I, who was far away, felt the impact. I didn't even have time to resist before my body was sent flying. A few seconds later, he fell heavily to the ground. Longpu of Jinshan Temple was smart. He hid behind the Sakyamuni statue to avoid the impact of the airwaves. However, his face became paler. It was obvious that he was also affected. I turned to look at the Sakyamuni statue. The Tai Sui Yang god contained all of my cultivation in the Yang spirit realm. With the help of the handprint, the power that erupted was extremely strong, but the Sakyamuni statue was still able to resist it. It was not easy. This time, Longpu and I had the idea of finishing the battle in one go, so we had almost exhausted all of our cultivation. Who would have thought that there would still be no winner? The situation was once again in a stalemate. I was not worried. Instead, I was happy. I could take advantage of this time to quickly replenish my Dao Qi and heal my injuries. The true dragon Qi in the jade bracelet was quickly absorbed into my body and turned into Dao Qi to nourish my body. At the same time, my spiritual sense controlled the Tai Sui Yang god to continue fighting with the Sakyamuni statue to keep up the pressure on Longpu. His situation was different from mine. The amulet that Longpu of Jinshan Temple had taken out was obviously an external force. After he had taken it out, he had been sitting cross-legged behind the Buddha statue. It seemed that he was also recovering his cultivation. Although he did not have a heaven-defying item like the jade bracelet, he had been recovering longer than me. It was hard to say who had the upper hand. About 15 minutes later, the Dao Qi in my body had recovered by 70 to 80%, and my witch Qi had also slowly recovered. After advancing to the Yang spirit realm, I did not need to rely on absorbing other witch Qi to nourish myself like before. Instead, I could rely on the Tai Sui Yang god itself to recover my witch Qi. After all, the original Tai Sui contained almost endless witch Qi. After transforming into the Yang spirit, the witch Qi would not disappear. It would just become a kind of foundation and gather in the Yang spirit. My strength had recovered more than half, so I did not want to continue the stalemate with Longpu. After all, he was also recovering. When he recovered, it might be another hard battle. It was better to take the initiative now and catch him off guard. With this thought, I stood up and looked at Longpu. After the previous round of fighting, the muddy ground in the middle of the battlefield had sunk dozens of meters deep. The weeds within 100 meters had also been swept away, leaving only a bare area. Longpu was still hiding behind the Sakyamuni Buddha statue, sitting cross-legged to recover from his injuries. I took a deep breath and circulated the witch Qi in my body at the same time. Almost at the same time, the power of the Tai Sui Yang god suddenly rose, and flames appeared around it. In the flames, the complicated mark on its forehead emitted a golden light, as if it had grown another eye. It stared at the Sakyamuni Buddha statue in front of it, as if it had locked on to its target. I pointed at it, and it went straight to the Sakyamuni Buddha statue. Its hands were burning with red flames. In the blink of an eye, it reached the statue and hit its chest. The Yang spirit was very small, less than the height of an arm. When it hit the tall Buddha statue, it was like a moth flying into a flame. It looked like there was a great disparity in strength, but the final result was completely different from what it seemed. The small Yang spirit had the power of 1,000 kilograms. When it hit the statue, the flames around it burst out and covered the entire Sakyamuni Buddha statue. The flames were originally the power of Yang, so they could restrain the dark Buddha statue. Amidst the flames that filled the sky, the Sakyamuni Buddha statue was no longer as stable as before. In the blink of an eye, it flew out and fell to the ground, creating a deep pit. The evil aura around it also dissipated a lot. Seeing that the Sakyamuni Buddha statue had temporarily lost its power, I temporarily stopped the Yang spirit and walked toward Longpu. At this time, Longpu of the Jinshan Temple had opened his eyes. Obviously, he couldn't accept the fact that I had defeated the Sakyamuni Buddha statue. His eyes were scarlet, and his face was extremely gloomy. His chest was heaving up and down. He seemed to be extremely angry. When people are angry, they must do something crazy. I was secretly vigilant. I stepped on the Big Dipper, and the Xianyuan sword in my hand fell, directly slashing at him. After filling it with enough qi of the way, the Xianyuan sword qi was dozens of feet long. With just a wave of my hand, the sword qi swept in front of his face. With the sharpness of the Xianyuan sword qi, if the sword hit him, not even his bones would be left. I thought he would desperately try to avoid it, but he didn't. Instead, he closed his eyes. His action made my heart tremble. With his cultivation and means, it was impossible for him to directly choose to give up resistance at this time. Therefore, my heart became more and more serious. The Xianyuan sword qi in my hand didn't slow down at all. Instead, it sped up. In the blink of an eye, it was less than a meter away from him. Right at this moment, Long Pu's eyes suddenly opened, and he started howling loudly. His tone was strange, and it was similar to his Buddhist chant from before, but it was much sharper. It was as if he was in purgatory and was experiencing endless pain. As the howl sounded, thick smoke came out of his body in an instant. As the thick smoke left his body suddenly burst open. At this time, the Xianyuan sword qi finally touched his body, but it only turned his broken limbs into smoke. This sudden change surprised me, and I didn't know what kind of method he was using. However, when I saw the thick smoke that had left his body and was floating toward the fallen Sakyamuni Buddha statue on the ground, I suddenly understood. Long Pu was also a yang spirit celestial master, so he could naturally separate the yang spirit from his body. However, the yang spirit of a Nanyang cultivator seemed to be quite different. Unlike the Huaxia cultivators, who cultivated the yang spirit into their own appearance, it turned into a puff of smoke. Because of this, I didn't notice it at all. It was obvious that his recovery speed was far slower than mine. Under the Xianyuan sword qi, he knew that he couldn't resist at all, so he had to abandon his body. However, although his yang spirit had left his body, it didn't escape. Instead, it attached itself to the Sakyamuni Buddha statue, obviously tried to struggle before death. The Sakyamuni Buddha statue was not an ordinary object, and Long Pu's cultivation was extremely high. Previously, he had only sacrificed a drop of blood from his fingertip to greatly increase the strength of the Buddha statue. Now that he had attached his yang spirit to the Buddha statue, it would be even more difficult to deal with him. Obviously, this was Long Pu's last act of madness. To be honest, I wasn't completely sure, but I wasn't afraid at all. At the moment, it was a life-or-death situation. Neither he nor I had a way out. Chapter 8:16. With all my strength, it only took me a few seconds to reach the deep pit. I saw that the Sakyamuni Buddha statue under the deep pit was shaking violently. It seemed that the statue didn't want to be controlled easily and wanted to compete with Long Pu's yang spirit. This gave me an opportunity to take advantage of. The opportunity was fleeting, so I didn't dare to neglect it. I raised the Xianyuan sword and jumped down. I'd already found the right position, so I didn't show any mercy and directly stabbed the statue's glabella. The glabella was where the life soul was. Although this Buddha statue couldn't be judged by common sense, it was the center. Even if the sword couldn't destroy it, it could still make it lose its fighting power. Moreover, at this time, the two forces inside the Buddha statue were fighting for control. This attack might seriously injure both of them at the same time, which would save me trouble later. Unfortunately, when the Xianyuan sword was only a few centimeters away from the glabella, the Buddha statue suddenly stopped shaking, and its eyes became much clearer. It was obvious that Long Pu's yang spirit had completely controlled the Buddha statue. In this way, I didn't waste any more time. I increased the strength of my hand and stabbed the sword forward. After seizing control, under Long Pu's control, the Sakyamuni Buddha reacted faster. When the Xianyuan sword fell, he raised his hand and grabbed the sword. The Xianyuan sword was an ancient divine weapon. Even if I didn't send my Taoist qi into it, its power to expel evil spirits could still make the Buddha statue suffer. In just a few seconds, thick smoke billowed from the Buddha statue's palm, and its expression was very distorted. However, this action also neutralized my attack and gave me a chance to breathe. He grabbed the Xian Yuan sword with great strength and didn't let go no matter how hot it was. I couldn't take it back for a while. After a while, he roared and increased the strength of his hand. With a sudden swing, he threw me away. I wasn't discouraged, even though my attack didn't hit. While my body was flying backward, I controlled the Yang spirit to step forward and use the previous method. My whole body was covered in flames. Compared with the first time, the Yang spirit was more skillful in controlling the flames. The temperature in the flames was also more terrifying. Even the surrounding air seemed to be twisted by the heat, and ripples spread all around. Although I was dozens of meters away from it, I still felt a strong burning sensation. At this moment, the Buddha statue had yet to stand up, but waves of wailing could be heard coming from the bottom of the pit. The taste of being roasted must be unbearable for the Buddha statue. Relying on the power of flames alone was naturally not enough to completely destroy the Buddha statue. Accompanied by a miserable howl, the Buddha statue once again stood up shakily amidst the billowing smoke. Its entire body was in tatters, and it had long since lost its previous arrogant appearance. The strange thing was, although it looked miserable, it seemed to have adapted to the temperature of the flames. Standing in the middle of the flames, its face no longer looked like it was in pain. Instead, it looked a bit crazed. It beat its chest and stamped its feet as if it had gone mad. A few seconds after its arms were covered in gray mist, it suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a dark pearl that was wrapped in an evil aura. This bead was oval in shape, and it was spat out from the mouth of the Sakyamuni Buddha statue. It looked very much like the Buddha Sarira of Buddhism. The Buddhists emphasized that relics were related to the merits of cultivation. Generally speaking, only eminent monks who had comprehended the Great Way would leave relics for the world to worship after they passed away. The Buddha relic not only contained profound dharma, but also a powerful Buddhist power. I heard from Nangong that he had found a Buddha relic to turn old Master Yuan's corpse into the appearance of a monk. From this, it could be seen that this Buddha relic also had the ability to reverse yin and yang. However, I didn't expect that the Sakyamuni Buddha statue could give birth to a Buddha Sarira. Considering the situation before and after, it's very likely that Long Pu's Yang spirit used some kind of method to create such a thing. Recently, I've had a lot of dealings with the Buddhists, so I have a good understanding of them. Although the Buddha relic has different colors and different powers, I've never heard of a dark relic. Looking at the evil aura of this relic, it doesn't have the benevolence of the Buddhists at all. Therefore, the Buddha relic of the Sakyamuni Buddha statue is just another form of evil. As the saying goes, evil can never defeat good. This dark relic is just an unorthodox method, so I'm not afraid. Since I can deal with the Sakyamuni Buddha statue, it's not a big deal to have another Buddha relic. At this moment, the dark relic was spinning rapidly in the air. After a while, it flew toward my Tai Sui Yang spirit. Although I'm confident, I don't dare to be careless. My hands are constantly making hand seals, and the witchcraft and Taoist chi in my body are also moving crazily. I control my Yang spirit to stimulate the flames around it. Instead of retreating, I attack the dark relic. Since this relic also has a thick, evil aura, it should be restrained by the flames of my Tai Sui Yang spirit. That's why I didn't change my plan. However, the result was not as optimistic as I had thought. The red flames that the Tai Sui Yang spirit had summoned were as brittle as bubbles when they met the relic. In the blink of an eye, most of them were extinguished. Then, I realized that the dark relic didn't seem to be afraid of the pure Yang power. Just like a moment ago, when the Sakyamuni Buddha statue had spat out the Buddha relic, it was no longer afraid of the flames. It didn't mean that the dark relic could restrain the pure Yang power. In fact, the yin and yang powers restrained each other. It's just that the degree was different. Previously, The pure yang power of the Tai Sui yang spirit was stronger, and the Sakyamuni Buddha statue was restrained. Now, the evil aura in the dark relic was stronger, and the pure yang power of the Tai Sui yang spirit was restrained. I understood the reason, but I didn't have time to use other methods in a hurry. But even I didn't expect that the Tai Sui yang spirit would suddenly change at this time. From the mark on its forehead, a golden beam of light suddenly shot out and met the dark relic. In the blink of an eye, the two collided. Immediately, the evil aura around the relic was dispersed. A few seconds later, under the golden light, the Buddha relic exploded, turning into black smoke and dissipating in the waves of air. As the dark relic exploded, the Sakyamuni Buddha statue was sent flying. Its blood-red skin gradually returned to its original appearance, and its solid body turned into a phantom once again. Seeing this, I was shocked. The Buddha relic was obviously Long Pu's trump card. He had to risk his life to use it. At first, I had underestimated his power and was almost taught a lesson. I didn't expect that the Buddha relic would be destroyed under the golden light of the mark on the Tai Sui yang spirit's head. In this way, Jinshan Temple's Long Pu had no more tricks up his sleeve. I looked at the Sakyamuni phantom again. It was much fainter than before. Obviously, it couldn't fight back anymore. Just as I heaved a sigh of relief, a mass of black mist suddenly rose from the Sakyamuni phantom and flew away. Jinshan Temple's Long Pu was trying to escape. I was already prepared, so how could I let him escape so easily? The moment it left, I leaped into the air and arrived in front of it, even though I had started later. Long Pu's ferocity didn't diminish. Seeing that I had intercepted him, he directly rushed toward me. I was waiting for him with the Xianyuan sword in my hand. Seeing this, I moved the sword to the side and slammed him to the ground. At this time, Long Pu's yang spirit was like an arrow at the end of its flight. After being injured, he couldn't escape. I landed on the ground and reached out to grab the black mist. I didn't think much and directly used the soul-searching technique to extract all the memories in his soul. With my current cultivation, it was difficult for me to search the soul of Long Pu, who was at the late stage of yang spirit. After all, his cultivation was higher than mine. However, after the previous fierce battle, not only was his body damaged, but his yang spirit was also at the end of its flight. Facing my soul-searching technique, he couldn't resist at all and could only let me do it. Soon, I finished the soul-searching technique. Since his yang spirit was useless to me, I controlled the Xianyuan sword to destroy his yang spirit. As his yang spirit disappeared, the Buddhist medallion that had summoned the Sakyamuni Buddha statue also broke and scattered on the ground like rubble. After killing Long Pu, I turned my head and observed the surroundings for a while. After confirming that there were no more threats around, I relaxed and carefully examined the information I had just obtained from Long Pu's soul. Long Pu's name was Long Pu Zhuang. He was the monk from Jinshan Temple who had suggested to the king that the Jade Buddha Temple should leave the palace. The reason he had done that was because Jinshan Temple had reached an agreement with the king. The agreement was that Jinshan Temple would replace the Jade Buddha Temple as the chief temple of Thai Buddhism. In return, Jinshan Temple would help the king obtain some kind of treasure from the Jade Buddha Temple to prolong his life. The king of Thailand was over 70 years old, and his body was weak and sickly. He knew that he didn't have much time left, and ordinary medical treatments wouldn't work. He could only kneel and pray to the Buddha to prolong his life. However, it didn't work for several years. He could only sit and wait for the day of his life to end. At this moment, Long Pu Zhuang of Jinshan Temple took the chance to tell the king that the Jade Buddha Temple had a magical treasure that could reverse yin and yang. It could cure diseases, relieve pain, and prolong one's life. The king was already disheartened. When he heard this news, he felt like he had found a life-saving straw. How could he not be happy? Of course, although he was excited, he still kept his mind. After some discreet investigation, he found that what Long Pu Zhuang had told him was true. Once the monks of the Jade Buddha Temple became Long Pu, they would go to a mysterious place to continue their cultivation. They wouldn't show up for hundreds of years. However, People had confirmed that they were still alive. The king was very excited when he learned about this. However, he also understood that since the treasure was so precious, the Jade Buddha temple wouldn't hand it over easily. Thailand was a religious country. Buddhists accounted for 90% of the population, and the king was just a symbol of the country. He didn't have much real power. Moreover, the Jade Buddha temple was the chief temple of Thai Buddhism. If the Jade Buddha temple didn't hand over the magical treasure, the king couldn't do anything to it. However, this was a matter of life and death. This might be the only way to prolong his life, so he wouldn't give it up easily. The king thought about it again and again. He felt that this was a serious matter, and he didn't have the power to participate in it. He could only borrow the power of Thai Buddhism. He knew that the Jinshan Temple must have a motive for providing this information. In terms of strength, the Jinshan Temple and the Jade Buddha Temple were on par. It was not impossible to use the Jinshan Temple to fight against the Jade Buddha Temple. Long Pu Zhuang already knew what the king was thinking, so he took the opportunity to tell the king his plan. Since then, the king ordered the Jade Buddha Temple to participate in the Buddhist competition. Then, Long Pu Zhuang used the reason that the Jade Buddha Temple was ranked last in the competition to suggest to the king that the Jade Buddha Temple should move out of the Grand Palace and let the new chief temple take over. The Jinshan Temple had a deep foundation, so the new chief temple naturally fell on its head. As long as the Jinshan Temple moved into the Grand Palace, the magical treasure would be easily obtained by the king. However, this matter was of great importance, so the king had to put on an act to not let others notice anything unusual. He didn't agree in a hurry, so he delayed it until now. Today, the Jinshan Temple's monks came to find me to settle the previous matter and to exert pressure on the Jade Buddha Temple, making them move out of the Grand Palace. Seeing this, Long Pu Zhuang's soul didn't have any more useful information. I wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, I stared in the direction of the clear sky pagoda and pondered. Previously, I had guessed that the magical treasure that Long Pu Zhuang mentioned was undoubtedly the clear sky pagoda. From the information he had just obtained, he didn't even know the effects of the clear sky pagoda. I was afraid that it was just hearsay. Chapter 817. Long Pu Zhuang had already been killed, and now wasn't a good time to get the clear sky pagoda. Why not send the other people from Jinshan Temple away and do Jade Buddha Temple a favor? Then there would be less resistance to get the clear sky pagoda. Thinking about that, I prepared to return to Jade Buddha Hall. Just as I took 2 steps, there was a loud explosion behind me. I turned around and saw that the ground behind me had split open. Soil flew in all directions. After the soil layer broke open, I felt a familiar aura. It was the clear sky pagoda. Did someone activate the clear sky pagoda? That was the first thought that came to my mind, but I immediately denied it. The hole that the clear sky pagoda was in was 100 meters from the ground. Even if someone activated the clear sky pagoda, there shouldn't be such a huge commotion. What happened? I was shocked and hurried over to take a look. However, just as I lifted my leg, the area where the ground had collapsed completely, and the top of the clear sky pagoda popped out of the ground. The clear sky pagoda was about to break out of the ground. Before I could react, the clear sky pagoda continued to rise. Very quickly, the entire pagoda appeared, and it didn't stop. It actually flew up from the ground and flew into the sky. I was confused. Did the godly weapon have a spirit and realized that someone was plotting something, so it flew away on its own? Such a guess was too idealistic. I hesitated for a moment before gritting my teeth and chasing after it. Compared to the godly weapon having a spirit, I was more willing to believe that someone activated the clear sky pagoda in the dark and took advantage of the fight between me and Long Pu Zhuang to get it and bring it away. Naturally, I wouldn't allow such a thing to happen. I instantly raised my speed to the maximum and headed for the clear sky pagoda. However, what I didn't expect was that the clear sky pagoda's flying speed became faster and faster. At the start, I could still see traces of it, but after a few seconds, it actually disappeared and became a black dot in the distant sky. With such speed, I couldn't even follow it with my naked eye, so how could I fight for it? When the clear sky pagoda's aura completely disappeared from my senses, I sighed helplessly and stopped chasing. I followed the original path and returned to Jade Buddha Temple. After witnessing the clear sky pagoda's speed, I had to admit that the godly weapon had a spirit. That speed, just now, wasn't something that a human could achieve. Since it's like this, it can only prove that this vast heaven pagoda is not fated with me. My thoughts of attempting to snatch it previously also faded considerably at this time. I stopped fantasizing about the clear sky pagoda and returned my thoughts to the battle between Jade Buddha Temple and Jinshan Temple. At this moment, the clear sky pagoda had already disappeared. Regardless of what the people of Jinshan Temple were thinking, they weren't prepared to have any results. Thus, I didn't intend to participate in this matter. I only needed to inform Wet Dragon Granny about the disappearance of the clear sky pagoda. After all, I was the only eyewitness. It's just that what I saw was too unbelievable. If I told Wet Dragon Granny, I'm not sure if he would believe me or not. Of course, I did not take his attitude to heart, and it did not matter whether I believed him or not. While pondering, I quickly returned to the Jade Buddha Hall. At this moment, the people of the Jade Buddha Temple and the Jinshan Temple were still waiting anxiously. When they saw me return, they were thrilled. How did the battle go? Previously, when the clear sky pagoda flew away, although there was a huge commotion, to the people waiting here, they clearly thought that it was the commotion caused by the battle between me and the pure dragon manor. They didn't know that something had happened to the clear sky pagoda. I first told them about the massacre of the pure dragon manor. After hearing the result, the joy on Wet Dragon Granny's face became thicker. The monks of Jinshan Temple were dumbstruck. It seemed they couldn't believe the result. However, the fact that I was standing here and the pure dragon manor didn't show up was enough to prove everything. After telling them the result, I didn't think much and told him everything about the clear sky pagoda. The joy on Wet Dragon Granny's face froze. It seemed he couldn't react in time. After a long while, he screamed, "How could it be?" I didn't have an answer to this question, so I couldn't answer him. At this moment, the monks of Jinshan Temple had woken up from a shock. They glared at me with resentful eyes. Some of them were cursing and talking in Thai. I didn't understand them, so I didn't pay attention to them. However, a monk used his broken Chinese to threaten me. Master Zhao Kuan will know about this soon. At that time, I won't be able to escape. Jinshan Temple had Zhao Kuan, and I knew that. After killing the pure dragon manor, I didn't plan to stay in Thailand. Now that the clear sky pagoda had disappeared, I didn't have any reason to stay here. Even if Zhao Kuan was strong, I didn't believe he would dare to come to China to kill me. At their realm, if they dared to intrude China, the old men in the Penglai immortal region wouldn't spare them. That was why I wasn't worried. I just sneered and looked at the people of Jinshan Temple. If they didn't give up, I didn't mind keeping them here. Seeing my unfriendly face, the monks of the Jinshan Temple reacted. They shut their mouths and snorted at me. Then, all of them left the Jade Buddha Hall without saying goodbye. After they had left, Shipropo came to me. It seemed he wanted to ask me about the clear sky pagoda. However, he looked at me and opened his mouth. However, he didn't say anything. No matter what he thought, I had decided to leave. I told him everything about the pure dragon manor's plot. I asked him to tell the king of Thailand that the thing they wanted had disappeared. Even if they destroyed the Jade Buddha Temple, it wouldn't change anything. As long as the king didn't want this, Jinshan Temple wouldn't be able to touch the Jade Buddha Temple, not even if they had Zhao Kuan. I didn't need to stay here anymore. I waved my hand and didn't wait for Shipropo to reply. I left the Jade Buddha Hall. After leaving the Jade Buddha Temple, I planned to return to China on foot. Since I had just reached the Yang God realm, I needed some time to stabilize my cultivation base. Although it was far from China, with my cultivation base, it would only take me half a month to get there on foot. I wanted to use this time to study the things I had learned recently. I was sure my power would increase to the next level. As soon as I had this thought in my head, I sensed something in Shang Liu's bag. I released my spirit sense to check. It was a message from the sound transmitting talisman. My mind flickered, and the talisman appeared outside Shang Liu's bag. From its aura, I knew it was Zhang Canwen. After I unfolded the talisman, a line of small words appeared in my eyes. People from Mount Longhu are here. Come back. Mount Longhu? Why did this group of haunting fellows suddenly come to find him again? I was worried and hurried to send a message to ask about the situation. However, Zhang Canwen didn't reply even after I sent the message. The situation was so urgent that Zhang Canwen couldn't tell me the details. I didn't want to return to China on foot anymore. I rushed to the airport and flew to Shenzhen. On the way there, I kept sending messages to Zhang Canwen. However, I didn't get any response even after the plane landed. After leaving the airport, I immediately soared into the sky. It was a half-hour drive, but with my full speed, it only took me a few minutes to return to the Feng Shui metaphysics shop. Before I entered the shop, I sensed a strong Taoist aura on the upper floor. It was the young god, celestial master from Mount Longhu. This person's cultivation base was higher than mine, so I couldn't sense his realm. However, from his aura, he was almost the same as the one from Dragon Village. I guess he was at the middle or late stage of the yang god, celestial realm. Besides that, after carefully checking, I sensed Zhang Canwen's weak aura. I felt a little relieved. From his aura, I knew he was hurt badly. However, as long as his life wasn't in danger, it was a good thing. I didn't have time to enter the shop. I directly flew to the window on the second floor, kicked the window open, and jumped into the shop. Although I had expected it, I was still enraged when I saw the scene in the room. At this moment, all the furnishings in the room were destroyed. Zhang Canwen was lying on the ground. Blood kept gushing from his mouth and nose. A white-bearded Taoist priest was sitting on the sofa. There were only the two of them in the room. Xiao Lu and the others were nowhere to be seen. Seeing me come in, the white-bearded Taoist priest looked at me with interest. He said faintly, "I've been waiting for you for a long time. You're finally back." I didn't have time to pay attention to him. I quickly walked toward Zhang Canwen to check his injuries. Zhang Canwen's injuries were serious. His mouth was blocked by a blood clot, so he could only make muffled sounds. However, he still pointed at the white-bearded Taoist priest sitting on the sofa, signaling me to be careful. I knew he was worried that I wasn't the Taoist priest's match. I sighed and whispered to him, "Brother Zhang, don't worry. I'll deal with him." Zhang Canwen and I knew each other well. After hearing my words, he seemed to be relieved. His body softened, and he fainted. It wasn't a good time to treat Zhang Canwen's injuries. I summoned Tong Tong and asked her to take care of Zhang Canwen. Then, I stood up and looked at the white-bearded Taoist priest. In a low voice, I asked, "You guys from Mount Longhu are haunting me. Why have you come to my shop?" The old Taoist had a calm expression on his face. After glancing at my pupils, he turned to me and said, "It's not that I'm haunting you, but you killed the Taoist of Mount Longhu first. Could it be that I can't demand an explanation from you?" Taoist? I frowned. I had seen the Taoist of Mount Longhu before, but it was in Chiyo's skull tomb. I remembered that the Taoist of Mount Longhu, Lu Jinyang, and the others were all trapped in Chiyo's tomb. It had been a long time, so who knew how they were doing? Fortunately, Lu Jinyang had the evil spirit to help him comprehend his inheritance. As for the people from Mount Longhu, they were most likely dead. In a sense, I was the one who killed the Taoist. However, they had attacked me first, so I couldn't be blamed for fighting back. As for the people from Mount Longhu, it was most likely the Taoist child that I had released when I left Chiyo's tomb. After he returned to the mountain, he explained the situation to the people from Mount Longhu. That Taoist child was innocent, and I wasn't someone who would kill indiscriminately. I didn't kill him to keep his mouth shut. Now that I was being pursued, it was reasonable. In fact, I had this concern back then, so I returned to my shop for a while. However, I didn't see any movement from Mount Longhu, so I thought that they wouldn't come again. That's why I came here today. Chapter 8:18. The old Taoist didn't feel offended after seeing my tit for tat. Instead, he chuckled and continued. "It's true that knowing someone by their reputation isn't as good as meeting them in person. You're really arrogant. Forget it. Our Mount Longhu has always been fair. Daozi this matter isn't entirely your fault. In fact, the Liu family's kid is more guilty. According to what I know, you and Liu Xingyang are mortal enemies. How about this? You tell me Liu Xingyang's whereabouts, and I'll go find him to understand the situation before deciding the two of you. What do you think? His words were reasonable and even had a hint of pity in them. However, I was shocked. Mount Longhu has always been fair. How could he say such shameless words in such a serious manner? Apart from being shameless, I was also surprised that he would ask about Liu Xingyang's whereabouts. Back in Chiyo's tomb, the people of Mount Longhu had obviously reached an agreement with Liu Xingyang to deal with me. Daozi's whereabouts had disappeared. For what the old Daoists said, it seemed that Mount Longhu had placed their focus on Liu Xingyang. In order to find Liu Xingyang's whereabouts, they would even let me go. This was really unimaginable. There must be a reason for something that was beyond common sense. Mount Longhu had to have a reason for wanting to find Liu Xingyang. And this reason was obviously more important than me. What did Liu Xingyang have? The power of Mount Longhu could be said to be one of the best in the world of metaphysics. Although Liu Xingyang had received Chiyo's inheritance and the Chiyu axe, these things alone weren't enough for Mount Longhu to covet. From the current situation, it was clear that Mount Longhu had a bigger plan. After thinking for a while, I couldn't figure out what the people of Mount Longhu were planning. However, no matter what they were planning, I didn't want them to succeed. Thus, even though I knew that Liu Xingyang was most likely still in Chiyo's tomb, I still shook my head. Since you know that we are arch-enemies, you don't dare to come and ask me. If I knew his whereabouts, I would have already gone there and killed him. You wouldn't even have the chance to ask me. After hearing my words, the old Taoist was startled, as though he had acknowledged my words. However, after a moment, he shook his head and said, "That's impossible. A few days ago, we searched everywhere for people who were proficient in divination to divine Liu Xingyang's location. All the signs pointed to you. No matter how you look at it, the results of the physical examination can't be wrong. There must be a clue on you." Test? I furrowed my brows. Just what was Mount Longhu planning? They invited all the divination experts in the world just to find Liu Xingyang. Without waiting for me to understand, the old Taoist priest changed his expression and continued to say to me, "Little friend Joe, I admit that there was some conflict between you and our Dragon Tiger Mountain, but that was then and this is now. We are looking for Liu Xingyang because we want to cause trouble for him. You and he are mortal enemies. As long as you tell us his location, we will help you take revenge. Such a good thing. Why wouldn't you be happy? Just because of our previous transgressions, you don't want to give up such a great opportunity to take revenge?" I was speechless. This young god, celestial master of Mount Longhu, was really shameless. In order to get information, he would do anything. Just now, he looked like he wanted to kill me. But now, he became little friend Joe E and said that he wanted to take revenge for me. At that moment, I didn't know what to say. While I was stunned, the old Taoist priest seemed to want to persuade me again. However, his expression suddenly changed, and he said in shock, "You don't want to reveal Liu Xingyang's location? Could it be that you have already taken the key?" After saying this, he suddenly came to a realization and said, "That's right. You have no reason to protect Liu Xingyang. The reason why you didn't say it must be that you already have the key and are afraid that we will find out. Good lad, you actually have such a scheming mind." Key. I wasn't unfamiliar with this word. Back then, in the Yinshang royal tomb, the woman that appeared from the bronze coffin, including Yi Piampian and Yimaolan, were the keys to the legendary gate of eternal life. The word that the old Taoist mentioned was naturally referring to this key. However, for what he said, it seemed that Liu Xingyang had the key. I frowned and reacted. After coming out of the Yinshang royal tomb, the celestial masters of Taoism, Xin Dao, and Longhu Mountain, a total of 18 people, all died. At first, I thought that it was the evil sacrificial spirit who did it. Later on, I heard him say that it wasn't. Moreover, Liu Xingyang came back to life, so I guess that it was Liu Xingyang who killed those people. Now that I heard the old Taoists say that the key was in Liu Xingyang's hands, it was basically confirmed that Liu Xingyang killed those people and that woman ended up in Liu Xingyang's hands. The old Taoist in front of me, or rather, Longhu Mountain, came to find me to find Lu Jinyang, or rather, to find the key in Lu Jinyang's hands. It was no wonder why his attitude had changed so much. He had threatened and tempted me. It turned out that everything was because of the so-called key. As soon as I understood the secret, the old Taoist grinned fiendishly. He didn't look as friendly as before. With a cold voice, he said, "That kid from the Liu family used the key to cooperate with us. However, he didn't want to give us the key. I didn't expect that he would end up in Chiyo's tomb. If he had given the key to Longhu Mountain earlier, you wouldn't have had the chance to reap the benefits." After listening to him, I couldn't help but wryly smile. This was the right attitude. Not distinguishing between right and wrong, and not listening to reason. That was how people of Longhu Mountain acted. I didn't want to explain to him. No matter what he wanted, I only knew that the people of Longhu Mountain had chased us to the feng shui metaphysics shop and even injured Zhang Canwen. No matter what their purpose was, I wouldn't let this old Taoist go that easily. As for the immortal gate and the key, I didn't covet them. That was why I didn't care about them. The old Taoist from Longhu Mountain wore a cold smile on his face. He didn't want to talk to me anymore. He waved his hand, and the scenery around us suddenly changed. All the furniture in the room disappeared, leaving only the two of us standing in an empty wasteland. It was just like when the heavenly fan was given to me by the patriarch. I thought that the old Taoist had brought me to an illusory world. However, after releasing my spiritual sense to check, I found that this place was real and not an illusory world. The old Taoist waved his hand casually and used a technique that could shrink the ground into inches, bringing me far away to another place. This skill was comparable to the heaven-measuring ruler. Longhu Mountain was worthy of being an orthodox Taoist sect that had existed for several thousand years. It was extraordinary that they could casually use such an immortal skill. The old Taoist didn't give me much time to sigh. He stood in front of me and gave me his last warning. "Kid, I advise you to give us the key. You should know that treasuring a jade ring will cause you to get into trouble." I smiled at him. "You're wrong. I don't understand that." After hearing my words, the old Taoist's face flashed with anger. He didn't waste time talking. He waved his hand and shouted, "Go!" As he moved, a talisman wrapped in the chi of the way rushed out of his mouth and directly into the sky. Longhu Mountain's main cultivation was talisman magic, so they used talismans most of the time when they fought. The old Taoist in front of me had the Yang spirit realm, so he didn't need to use cinnabar or yellow paper to make talismans. During the battle, the talismans automatically generated in the veins of the heavens and shot out. Since he used the power of the Yang spirit, the power of this talisman had reached the level of a golden talisman. In the blink of an eye, the sky above my head darkened. Then, thunderclouds rolled, and the power of thunder and lightning gathered. This scene was somewhat familiar. Back then, under Longhu Mountain, the temple master of the Black Altar, Chen Yangting, had also used the heavenly thunder talisman. However, at that time, we only had the Shuriao cultivation base, and the power of the heavenly thunder talisman was much weaker than it was today. The heavenly thunder talisman in front of me couldn't be compared to back then. In terms of power, it was thousands of times stronger than before. I wasn't completely confident that I could withstand it alone. While I was thinking, the first lightning bolt came from the rolling dark clouds and struck towards me. The heavenly thunder of Longhu Mountain never gave people the chance to dodge. So, I filled the armor remover sword with Taoist energy and stood at my original position. I held the armor remover sword and struck the lightning bolt. Fortunately, it was only the first lightning bolt, so its power wasn't too strong. After colliding with the armor remover sword energy, they canceled each other out. When the first lightning bolt dissipated, the armor remover sword was once again filled with Taoist energy. The old Taoist obviously didn't want to give me time to catch my breath. Soon, the second lightning bolt struck. I raised my sword again. This time, the armor remover sword and the lightning bolt were in a stalemate for a few seconds before dissipating. Although I was still able to withstand it, I felt the armor remover sword tremble during the process. The power of each lightning bolt was several times stronger than the previous one. I didn't know if the armor remover sword could withstand the third lightning bolt. This was an important matter, so I didn't dare to test it out. I had no choice but to play it safe. I put the armor remover sword away and took out the Xian Yuan sword from my mouth. When the old Taoist saw that I was holding the Xian Yuan sword, he was shocked. Then he became overjoyed. It seemed that he recognized the Xian Yuan sword. His eyes were filled with greed. He clicked his tongue and said, "With your strength, you don't deserve the Xian Yuan sword. I'll give you another chance. If you hand over the key and the Xian Yuan sword, I won't take your life." I ignored his chatter and focused on pouring Taoist energy into the Xian Yuan sword, preparing to receive the third lightning bolt. After a while, the dark clouds rolled even more violently and slowly approached me. The feeling of suppression was becoming more and more obvious. In the blink of an eye, the third lightning bolt came from the dark clouds and struck towards me. I knew that the power of the third lightning bolt would be ferocious, so I didn't dare to be careless. Almost at the same time that the lightning bolt struck, the Xian Yuan sword energy left the dark clouds and rushed towards it. This time, the sound of the collision was even louder. Waves of air blew the surrounding soil up. Fortunately, when the rumbling sound dissipated, the lightning bolt also disappeared. Seeing this, I heaved a sigh of relief and turned around to face the old Taoist. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.